An empty church, and only one figure in a black dress is inside and thinks about her loss, the guy Kale, who was her last hope. Suddenly, she stumbles and falls with her whole body to the floor. The heroine raises her head, and we notice that tears are rolling down her cheeks because she realizes that Kale was killed. The whole church hears the cry of a girl who turns to God and asks to return Kyle. She is even ready to give her life for this. The heroine says that she was reborn into a character named Hestia. We learn that the girl fell asleep, and when she woke up, she found herself in the novel she was reading. Hestia turned out to be a simple but very rich girl without a family. Such characters usually appear in stories for a reason, but to change the plot. The extra character lives a carefree life and spends money the way he wants. A lot of money buys status, and the heroine becomes a noblewoman. Having received noble status, Hestia goes to the ball, where she meets the beautiful Diana, who is the main character of the novel. Diana is so beautiful that it's as if our heroine's heart jumps out of her chest and takes her breath away. But the girl was struck not only by Diana, but also by Crown Prince Helios, who appears to us as the main character. Hestia is happy because at this ball, she will be able to see all her favorite characters. The second main character, Kaelis, who is unrequitedly in love with Diana, is also present at this ball. Everyone Hestia dreamed of meeting gathered at the ball, and she spent a lot of money for this. Our heroine is simply an unimportant extra character, so she can only watch from afar those whom she admires, but that's enough for her. Diana was everyone's favorite, noble, beautiful, kind, and showing love to everyone. Of course, the two best friends we met above immediately fall in love with such an ideal girl. There are also villains in this story, and to be more precise, these are Duke Orcus and his daughter, Duchess Ratona. Duchess Ratona is not so simple because she knows what power she has and uses it, wanting to marry Helios and become empress. Diana turned out to be an obstacle for the Duchess, and therefore, Ratona tries to hurt and humiliate the poor girl, but the main characters immediately come to her defense. With the help of blackmail, the Duchess of Ratona forces Helios to accept an engagement to her, and the prince has no choice but to agree to this. As a result, Kale intervened in this marriage and committed a cruel act, helping his best friend. Diana, having learned about what Kale had done, began to argue with him and shout at him, and in a fit of anger, orders him never to come into her sight again, which hurts Kale. After that quarrel, Diana turned her back on Kale forever. The wedding day arrived, and the loving hearts of Helios and Diana finally united. Hestia has been watching this story for a year now, which is approaching its happy ending. The heroine thinks that if the story is already over, then soon she will be able to return home. Helios and Diana are very happy with each other. Although Hestia is happy for the main characters and their happiness, she is also worried about Kaelis. The heroine wishes Kaelis all the best and hopes that he can move on with his life, even though his heart was broken. We learn that Kaelis did not come to the wedding of Helios and Diana, and Hestia is sorry that she will not be able to see him one last time. The novel is over. It's time for the heroine to return home. Although the heroine mentally said goodbye to her beloved Kaelis, a year later, fate brought them together again. Kaelis looks at the heroine with sadness. Hestia meets her beloved, but it's as if they are separated by a wall that prevents them from getting closer to each other. The end of the novel, the main characters got married and are happy. The main character is ready to return to her normal life, leaving the rich and carefree life from the novel, which she lived for a whole year. Soon, normal life will return, the girl will meet her family and friends, whom she already misses very much, and everything will return to normal. But Hestia's expectations were not met, and she never found herself in her familiar world as she had expected. The girl still believes that she will return, she just needs to wait, and goes to bed with hope. Days, weeks, months, a year pass, and she still cannot return home to the family and friends she wanted to see. Hestia has already lost all hope. She does not know what needs to be done in order to return to her real world. The mountain house is all that remains for the girl because she gave all her wealth to charity, thinking that she would return home. In a strange world, completely alone, without family or friends, our heroine no longer understands whether she is alive at all and what will happen next. But the girl is pressed not only by the unknown, but also by the understanding that her beloved Marquis Kaelis is still suffering and from time to time attempts suicide, but fortunately unsuccessful. We learn that Kaelis is haunted by the loss of his best friend and the girl he loved, and it has gotten to the point where he has lost the will to live and spent the entire year trying to die. Kaelis is constantly being saved, but he never stops trying to leave this life, and our heroine still hopes that someday he can become happy. All Hestia wanted was for her loved one to find happiness. Every night, the girl fell asleep with dreams that she would return home and finally see the book where Kaelis had the happy ending that she so wants for her beloved. But every morning, the girl still saw the ceiling of the mountain house in an empty and lonely, unfamiliar world for her. Hestia suffers. She cannot do anything with her life. She does not understand why she is in this world where she has no one. When you don't know what to do, you just begin to want to disappear from the world, disappear forever, and not suffer anymore. And then the girl sees someone whom she did not expect to see at all, and freezes with shock and surprise in her eyes. Her beloved Kaelis appears in front of the girl, with whom she makes eye contact. This all reminds me of a dream. The girl never expected to meet her love. She was sure that she would forever remain lonely and unnoticed. But the happiness did not last long. Kaelis began to leave, and Hestia made an attempt to stop him, calling out to him. Kaelis turns around, not understanding why a girl unknown to him is calling him, and waits for an explanation of what she needs from him. Meeting her beloved, the girl seems to come to life. Now she is not in so much pain, and she still does not believe that this is not a dream. She is so glad to see him. Hestia abruptly closes her mouth and does not allow her to say a word, and because of this, she's even more surprised, unable to say anything. It turns out that Kaelis is not just walking, but is hiding from men unknown to us who are looking for him. The girl is surprised not by the fact of the search, but by the fact that her lover is so close to her that he practically presses her to him, although this is also due to the fact that he is trying to hide. While Kaelis is trying to understand whether he was carried away, Hestia gets a blush of embarrassment on her face and cannot move from her place. Kaelis finally lets go of the girl and asks for forgiveness, and she understands that there is no point in him apologizing because she really liked the way he held her close to him, and she would have stood like that all day. A dialogue ensues between Hestia and Kaelis, in which the girl tries to find out who was looking for the guy and how she can help him. In a mountain house, the road to which is very confusing, it is finally not lonely, because the girl invites her love interest there. Kaelis is worried that Hestia is causing trouble and does not even realize that she has known him for a very long time. While the hero is worried about the inconvenience that he causes, the girl cannot believe her eyes, because her object of desire is sitting right in front of her. The dialogue continues between the characters, during which the heroine tries to find out all the information of interest. The guy admits that he wanted to disappear from this world, which plunges the girl into shock and makes her tense. Hestia understands him, because she too would like to disappear from this world in order to return to hers and finally see her friends and family. The young man notices how similar he is to the heroine, because they both cannot see those they love and miss so much. We again hear the story of Kaelis' broken heart, but from his lips, because he doesn't know that the heroine has known everything about him for a long time. Life without friends and love is hard, but the hero still understands that death will not be a solution for him. Kaelis admits that he is weak and believes that the heroine is much stronger than him, because even when she feels bad, she does not want to die. The girl understands that her beloved did not feel better after difficult events, even after a long time. Unfortunately, the hero only became even sadder over time. The girl, as someone who has been following Kaelis for a long time, immediately noticed all the changes in him and the fact that he began to look much worse. Taking the hero by surprise, Hestia suddenly runs away, promising to return soon. The girl decides that what still holds her back in this novel is that she needs to help her beloved Kale, and she is ready to do anything to give him back the desire to live. There is a chance that delicious food, sleep, walks, and good company can help the hero feel better. Unfortunately, all dreams are crushed in an instant when Kailis finds himself lying on the floor, covered in blood, and next to him is a dagger, which is the culprit of everything that happened. In this state, the heroine finds Kale, and everything that she bought for him also falls to the floor because the girl's hands are immediately pressed to her face. Hestia does not believe that she could allow this to happen because she left for only a short time and was sure that she could help her loved one. The girl is completely broken because her last hope of understanding the meaning of her presence in this novel is shattered, as is her heart. People mourn the death of the hero for only a day, and then they happily forgot everything and continued to live as if nothing had happened. And they forgot about the terrible news only because it was overshadowed by another, that the main characters of the novel, Diana and Helios, had a scandal, which came as a shock to everyone. It turns out that the love between the spouses has cooled, even though they were in a happy marriage for more than 2 years. Together with Kale, the girl's desire to live also died. Because all meaning was gone, she doesn't know how to get out and what to do in this world that is alien to her. Hestia came to the temple every day and simply wandered, because all meaning in her life was forever lost, and she did not know at all what to do next. Everything in life has gone downhill, and there is nothing left to do but think about what happened and what will never happen. And on top of everything else, Diana's strength began to weaken. So we reached the moment from which the story itself began. The heroine prays to God to save her beloved while in the temple, when suddenly everything turns white. We see a richly furnished room and realize that the girl has returned to the way she lived before. Hestia doesn't understand how it happened that she was in the temple, and then, surprisingly, she ended up in her old room. The heroine was feeling excellent, which was no less surprising than her unexpected movement. And then Hestia understands what is happening and where she is, because she recognizes a view that is identical to the one that was on the evening of the wedding of Diana and Hel. Some unknown force moved the heroine right to the end of the novel, and now she will have to find out why this was done. It is on this day, when the main characters of the novel get married, that Kale makes his first attempt at suicide, and therefore, Hestia is going to take everything into her own hands and save him. The girl hopes that she has a chance to save her beloved, and she does not want to miss it. Diana always took Kale's care for granted, and therefore never looked at him the way he looked at her, with love. There are guards at Kale's house who are suspicious of Hestia and do not want to let her see the hero without reason. Even after saying that the heroine has an important message for the young man, no one is going to let her in. But nothing can stop the girl, so they resort to a distraction, deceiving the guards that Saint Diana is behind them. The security is a ruse, and Hestia still manages to get inside. The girl intends to show her beloved that Diana does not deserve what he did for her, and as a result, the heroine catches him right before attempting to commit suicide. Hestia is ready to do anything to convince her lover to commit such a rash act. Kale clearly did not expect this and froze in place, not knowing what to do or say at the moment. The suicide attempt is stopped, and all that remains is to convince the hero not to try it again, because now there is a girl next to him who is ready to take care of him. Taking everything into her own hands, Hestia decided not to beat around the bush, but immediately said that she wanted to become a marchioness for her beloved. Here we meet Uros, who is Kale's butler, and he replaced the hero's parents and always took care of him. The butler, like our heroine, hoped that Kailis would be able to overcome his broken heart and move on with his life. But instead, Uros found a mess in the room, his master with a knife at his neck, and an unfamiliar girl who simply burst into the house. And on top of everything else, this unknown girl proposed to the Marquis, which no one expected. The heroine decides that she will never allow Kailas to die again, so she now decides not only to watch from the sidelines, but also to join the game. But all the girl's confidence disappears as soon as the Marquis begins to speak. But instead of the expected answer, Hestia heard only laughter, which suddenly began to sound from the lips of her love. Kailas laughs at this whole situation and asks if he looks so frivolous. What a surprise everyone was when, in the end, the Marquis told the heroine to do what she wanted. This was such a shock for the girl that she even asked if she had just imagined all this. The answer was so surprising and unexpected. Of course, this surprised Hestia very much, even though she suggested it herself. But agreeing to a wedding with a girl you see for the first time sounds too crazy. And after all this dialogue, the Marquis simply leaves, leaving the heroine and the butler, who do not even know each other, to figure out everything further. Kailas wanted to relax and be alone with himself, so he simply drives away his butler and the girl with whom he agreed to get married. Hestia and Uros froze, looking at each other and digesting what just happened, because it turned out to be a shock for both. The situation turned out to be quite unusual, so it's hard to believe in its reality and accept everything right away. After all the events, Hestia and Uros finally introduce themselves to each other and get to know each other in a calm atmosphere. A regular dialogue takes place, with the help of which Uros learns more about the one who will soon become his master's bride. The girl expected that now she would be scolded for simply breaking into the Marquis, but instead she heard only gratitude in her direction, because she saved Kailas's life. But Uros doesn't even realize that this previously unknown girl knows everything about Marquis, and therefore wonders how she knew that Kale needed help. The girl has to come up with a reason for breaking into someone else's house in a matter of seconds. And the main thing is that everything sounds convincing so as not to give herself away. Throwing everything away at superpowers would be the easiest option, but we don't know if that would have bad consequences. Since there was no time to come up with more convincing answers, Hestia decided to say that she could see the future. But from the look of the butler, it became clear that he was definitely not ready to believe it. The heroine decided to go to the end and said something that other people do not know in order to prove that she is not deceiving and sees the truth much more than an ordinary person. Now Uros begins to doubt that she is telling a lie because she has information that is unknown to almost anyone. It plays into the girl's hands that she perfectly remembers everything from the novel, because this increases her chances of convincing the butler. So Uros learns that this was not the last attempt of the Marquis to lose his life, which he no longer values at all. After the butler begins to listen to the girl's words, she makes a promise that she will save Kale. The butler is in complete shock, but there is nothing left to do but listen to the stranger, because the life of his master, whom he has always cared about, is at stake. Hestia explains the reason for her proposal to the Marquis by saying that this is all just to save his life, because this way she will always be there, and at any moment will be able to prevent something that has dire consequences. The girl does not need any wealth. The main thing is that her beloved is alive, healthy, and happy. The story doesn't sound convincing enough, even for a novel, but there is nothing else to do but hope that they will believe it. Fortunately for the girls, she was not kicked out, and was even allowed to discuss all this with the Marquis later, when he felt better. By the end of the dialogue, the time was approaching night, so the heroine was allowed to spend the night in the Marquis's house, in a separate room. After such a difficult and eventful day, Hestia will finally be able to rest, so that tomorrow she will again try to save her loved one with renewed vigor. In one day, the girl achieved a lot, and now she just has to continue in the same spirit to achieve what she wants. But Hestia was not the only one who was puzzled by what to do next, because at that time, Kale could not sleep either. The Marquis is confused, and doesn't know at all what to do and how to continue to live, because in a short time, he has lost people dear to him, and now he has also agreed to marry a stranger. In a fit of despair, the hero mentally turns to his beloved Diana, asking her for advice. The reckless act that the heroine committed still surprises even herself, and she still does not understand how she was able to do it. Only now does the girl realize what she signed up for, because a wedding is quite an important period in everyone's life, and she goes into it without really thinking about anything. But what has been said cannot be taken back, so Hestia can only come to terms with it, and the fact that she is just in a novel calms her down completely. The girl is still trying to convince herself that she did not strive to become Kale's wife, even though her feelings say otherwise. The heroine's desires fade into the background, because the most important thing she wants to achieve now is to save the life of her loved one and not to get married successfully. In the end, the girl settles on the fact that she is ready to do everything possible to achieve her goal and help Kale. Hestia decided that her most important task in the novel was precisely that she must convince the Marquis to commit suicide. A mysterious voice suddenly tells the heroine that they will always be with her, no matter what happens. The dream ends with thoughts about who the voices are that promise to help her, because it always seemed to her that she was alone in this world. Having fully woken up, Hestia continues to think about the strange dream that she had, and maybe it means something important. Then the butler appears in her room to greet the girl and ask how she slept in her new place. In the Marquis's house, the beds are so soft that the girl sleeps well, and the butler is happy about this. Euros, as an attentive person, notices Hestia's excitement and gently hints that she is unable to hide her condition. After the usual dialogue, the girl dares to ask about the condition of her beloved, about whom she is very worried. Although the butler gives an answer to this, saying that the Marquis is better today, he is surprised because the heroine should see the future, but does not know this. The girl, once again, has to come up with an excuse on the fly, and this time she reports that she sees only big events, to which the butler only says that he was joking, which puts Hestia in an awkward position. It's hard enough to trust a girl you've only known for a day, but she saved the Marquis, and that fact cannot be denied. And then the butler takes the heroine by surprise, saying that on the orders of the Marquis, he was preparing documents, and Hestia immediately understands what he's talking about. But first of all, she's worried about the fact that Euros worked all night while she was sleeping soundly. The meeting with the Marquis is so close, but you should understand that at the moment, he is in a vulnerable position, and every word must be chosen wisely. And then the girl again amazes Euros, asking him to bring something that Kale loves very much, and this is known only to the Marquis himself and his butler. After all the conversations, Hestia still goes to her beloved, although she is very worried about their meeting. She understands that the dialogue will be difficult and is already preparing for a difficult conversation in advance. And then Hestia sees Kale, who seemed to be waiting for her, looking at the door without taking his eyes off. It seemed that after this heavy look, the last hope for at least some kind of confidence, as if nothing had happened, had disappeared. All the memories associated with Kale's previous death suddenly began to emerge before the girl's eyes. But Hestia was able to pull herself together, because now she can fix everything if she tries. However, the girl's confidence and willpower do not help her start a dialogue, and an awkward pause hangs between the characters. The girl understands that she is unable to even move, because in front of her is the one whom she has loved from afar for a long time. Having made up her mind, Hestia nevertheless sits down next to Kale, and they begin to read the documents that the butler prepared for them. According to these documents, it turns out that after signing, Hestia will have all the powers that Kylus has, and she will also receive the status of Marquise. The girl was surprised by how well the document was compiled, which was created hastily, which shows the competence of the butler. To prove her honesty, Hestia refuses the clause in the contract that includes the girl's rights to the Marquis' property and money, and as a result, this part is excluded. While the girl and the butler are discussing the details, the Marquis, without even reading anything, signs the document without any hesitation. Hestia and Uros are very surprised by this turn of events because they didn't even have time to edit the document. But Kaelis, with all his appearance, shows how much he doesn't care about formalities and he only wants rest and silence. This action, once again, shows how depressed the Marquis is at the moment, and that life no longer means anything to him. Every action and every look of Kaelis makes the heroine worry about him even more. The girl tries to somehow cheer up her love and makes a promise that he will definitely not regret his decision. She even, despite her excitement, manages to show him her beautiful, radiant smile in order to somehow lift Kaelis's mood. But instead of an answering smile, the girl only receives words that she should leave and finally leave him alone. On this note, the meeting between the girl and the butler with the Marquis ends, and they leave his room in bewilderment, thinking about everything that has just happened. After Kael's behavior, the souls of both those who came out are now heavy, and the girl begins to think about the fact that she needs to get to the temple. The butler does not understand the girl's zeal at all, and asks the question why exactly she was needed in the temple. Hestia explains her impulse to go to the temple by saying that she needs to return something to the Marquis, which puzzles the butler. According to the girl, first of all, she intends to return Diana because she is very dear to the Marquis. Diana is not just an ordinary girl, but a saint who has divine power. But it turns out that Diana was not always considered a saint because she was from the common people, and therefore her position in the temple was not strong. And only thanks to Kael and his donation for the temple, in the form of the most fertile land, they helped Diana become a saint and achieve the position that gave her a happy and long life. If it weren't for Kael, then Diana would have nothing. But at the same time, she turned away from him during a difficult period of his life, which broke his heart. Hestia understands how unfairly Diana treated someone who always took care of her and helped her in everything. And while the heroine was in her thoughts, she had already been brought to the temple where she so wanted to go to help her beloved Marquis. The girl is going to talk to Diana and open her eyes to everything that Kael did for her, while she took it all for granted and did not notice. And then all the heroine's thoughts are confused by an unknown young man who, out of breath, turns to her, asking about the Marquis's carriage in which she arrived. But not seeing the Marquis himself at the carriage, the mysterious hero is surprised and asks where Mr. Kael himself is. Hestia is asked why the Marquis arrived without warning, to which the girl replies that at the moment she will take his place, which further shocks the already surprised guy. But the shocking facts don't end there, because Hestia introduces herself as Kaelis's wife, which the stranger clearly did not expect. Now it was the girl's turn to be surprised, because the guy's reaction to the information received was simply laughter. It turns out that Hestia was simply not believed, because everyone in the novel is sure that Kaelis will always love only Diana, and no one will be able to outshine her. But the girl did not listen to the stranger's arguments about her words, but simply headed to where she needed to go at the moment, according to her plans. The heroine clearly made it clear that she did not want to continue the dialogue with that guy, whoever he was. And so that the stranger doesn't argue again, the girl simply throws a whole bag of coins at him. Hestia knows perfectly well how to pacify such an insolent person, which was this unknown young man. Realizing that her method is working, the heroine says that she wants to meet with the high priest, and the guy no longer dares to argue with her, but immediately answers that he is ready to take her where she wants. And now the girl was already taken to another stranger who was ready to listen to her. But it turns out that this is not the high priest, as she demanded, and the girl needs him. It turns out that it is not so easy to get to the high priest, but the young man who is ready to listen to her also has a high rank. As it should be noted, everyone in the temple was very interested in Hestia's words that she is the wife of the Marquis, and now they are trying to find out more information about this from her. The girl, realizing that they are trying to test her, begins to have a polite conversation, saying that no one knows about the Marquis' marriage because they have only been married for a day. In confirmation, Hestia provides the marriage document and says that they can send a person to confirm the information with the Marquis himself. But even after all the evidence, they still didn't believe the girl because everyone was sure that Kalis would never stop loving Diana. Although the temple servant did not believe the heroine, he still decided to ask for what purpose she paid them a visit. And then it turns out that the reason for the visit to the temple was that Hestia decided to return the land that Kalis sacrificed for Diana. This land is very valuable for the temple, so this desire offended the servant so much that he jumped up from his seat, losing all his calm. They began to try to intimidate Hestia with God's wrath, but this did not frighten her at all, because she understands that all the commotion is because of the value of the land. And this land was given not to God, but to Saint Diana. So the talk about God's punishment did not sound convincing at all. And the saint who was given the land is no longer in the temple, so the girl decided to return the land back to the Marquis, albeit without his knowledge. Hestia knows everything about the greed of the temple and understands that the land of Saint Diana was simply brazenly appropriated by those to whom it does not belong. This is where the temple servant finally gives up and agrees that resolving such issues is not within his authority and decides to call someone of higher rank. The heroine was not sure that all this would work, but seeing the reaction of the temple servant, she realized that she said everything correctly. While the girl was waiting, she thought about how she wanted to show the whole world that Diana was not as perfect as many people saw her. Lost in thought, Hestia did not even notice that the one she had been so eagerly awaiting had crept up behind her. It was the high priest who finally appeared before the girl himself, and he already knew the reason why she came to the temple. While the heroine was waiting, all the documents were checked and their authenticity was confirmed, so they now began to handle the heroine much more carefully. The high priest did not stand on ceremony for long and immediately asked Hestia directly about the land that she so wants to return. The girl once again repeated her desire, reminding the high priest that this land originally belonged to the Marquis, and hoping that they had made contact with her, and now it would be possible to come to an agreement. However, the high priest let her know that he did not intend to return the land, and she came all this way in vain. The high priest's answer came as a surprise to the heroine, because Hestia didn't even think that there was a chance that she would hear a refusal to return the land. It turned out that the Marquis knew that the land of Ilion would not belong to Diana completely, as Hestia believed. But the girl decided that even with this turn of events, she had to stand her ground to the end, because she had come too far to stop. The heroine is full of determination and once again shows her strong character, deciding to remind herself and others that she now holds the title of Marquise. Hestia turned out to be not as simple as the high priest assumed, because she knows much more than they could imagine. And the heroine skillfully uses her knowledge, because if all the secrets of the temple end up on the pages of the newspaper, then their entire legend, built on lies and greed, will collapse. The high priest understands the precarious situation in which he and the temple itself are now, so he cannot even utter a word in response to the girl. The last chance to justify himself was for the high priest to try to pretend that he did not understand at all what Hestia was talking about. But from his behavior, it was clear that he was already on the brink. The girl notices the panic in the eyes of the high priest and understands that he will never get away with it, no matter what he tries to come up with, because his great secret has been revealed. Finding herself in a winning position, Hestia is finally able to directly laugh at the high priest. The girl also decided to discuss the duplicity of Diana, who is a saint, and use the love of the Marquis for her own purposes. And if we take into account the fact that Diana is a simpleton, but at the same time became the wife of the crown prince, then everything will only get worse, because the aristocracy will not be happy with this turn of events. And because of these words, the high priest tensed even more. Although Diana is supported by the common people, the aristocracy does not like those who were not one of them, but at the same time began to have the kind of power that the saint has. If the whole world finds out about the terrible secrets of the temple and the saint, then they will have problems that they are unlikely to cope with. The high priest's panic increases with every word the girl says, because he understands more and more what a real threat comes from her, and that he can't argue with her. For Hestia, it does not matter how cruel her accusations are, because she is ready to do anything for the sake of the person she loves, so she calmly continues to threaten the high priest. The girl is even ready to go to the emperor with this news, because she is ready to achieve her goal in all possible ways. The high priest is still trying to save his reputation and the reputation of the temple, because he begins to say that the girl has no evidence. But in response to the priest's attempts to wriggle out, the girl only grins, completely confident in her victory in this dispute. As a result, the temple servants leave, asking Hestia to wait a couple of minutes to discuss their current situation. The temple and those who are in charge of it are themselves not without sin. So the emperor's check and what is revealed during it can greatly harm everyone who serves in this temple. So the girl is sure that the high priest will not be able to do anything to stop her because she is in a more advantageous position than him. And the evidence that Hestia was talking about actually doesn't exist. She was just able to intimidate everyone so much that they didn't even try to check, but immediately trusted her. The heroine understands what a precarious position the temple is in now, so she begins to calmly say what she wants, and even slightly mock the employees. Hestia, in her opinion, acted generously because she did not immediately go to the emperor, but decided to settle everything quietly and peacefully, without illuminating it to the whole world. The high priest accepted that he could no longer do anything against the marquise, and he could only come to terms with it and agree to her terms. No one knows whether the high priest will do anything else to avoid giving away such valuable land for the temple. The marquise returns back only in the evening and is immediately met by the butler, who exclaims her name with alarm. Before the girl had time to enter the house, Euros immediately attacked her with various questions, not knowing what she had been doing in the temple for so long. And then a document appears before the butler's eyes, which states the guarantee of ownership of the land of Ilion, so valuable to the temple. Euros was incredibly happy about this, because this land was one of the most expensive, and now it finally returned to the possessions of the Marquis. The butler and Hestia jump happily, knowing how difficult it was to reclaim the land of Ilion, but Hestia was able to handle it, making herself and Euros happy. Kale himself watched this celebration from afar as he stood alone at the window. It seemed that Kailis was avoiding the girl and did not want to catch her eye at all, moving unnoticed and quietly. But even though he tried to hide, the girl still felt his gaze, which was directed in her direction. In order to somehow dispel the awkwardness between Hestia and Kailis, the butler invites the girl to tell the hero such wonderful news herself. And it is logical that the Marquise herself should tell Kale everything, because it was thanks to her that the Earth returned. But the girl is afraid to go to meet him. As a result, the girls decide to have the butler tell the Marquis everything himself, because he is not yet ready to see the heroine. While Euros goes to tell the news to Kailis, the girl will go to rest, because this day was quite difficult and eventful for her. The Marquise is very pleased with herself, because she has begun to put into action her plan to save her beloved. Before going to bed, the girl is already planning what she will do next. Namely, the first thing she will do is go to check the land that she was able to return. Although Kale himself needs to inspect the land, the heroine wants him to rest, so she is going to go herself. Absorbed in thoughts, Hestia quickly falls asleep, exhausted from the day, and while the girl sleeps soundly, absorbed in her victory in obtaining the land, others are growing worried about the information about the Marquise's unexpected wife. One hero, even after seeing all the documents, could not believe what he learned because he had not yet seen it with his own eyes. Information spreads quickly, so there is no way to stop its flow. Calus was quite surprised at how quickly the girl was able to get the land that the temple treasured back. All the girl's courage and perseverance disappears every time she meets her beloved, and here again, she sits awkwardly and does not know what to say to him in response. This is how their dialogue goes on, in awkwardness and embarrassment, while the girl tries to apologize for doing everything in secret from the young man. Although Hestia planned to go to inspect the newly acquired land, all plans were ruined as soon as the butler came to her with the words that the Marquis was calling her. The girl is very surprised that Cale is calling her to him, because before he always tried to avoid her. The heroine began to think that since Calus wants to see her, then he is definitely angry with her because she returned the earth without his knowledge. It turns out that the Marquis only now found out that his wife's name is Hestia, and decided to clarify this with her. There was again an awkward pause between the characters, which often occurs in their dialogues because they are not at all familiar enough to communicate calmly. Their eyes meet, and Cale no longer tries to hide the fact that he is looking directly at the girl. And then Hestia again begins to talk a lot indiscriminately because she is still very nervous in front of her beloved. The heroine notices every minor detail, even the fact that Caelius is reading the newspaper that she bought him. Taking a break from the newspaper, the Marquis turns to Hestia, to which she instantly responds. And then Caelius asks a question that the girl did not expect because he asked why she wanted to marry him because they don't even know each other. And here, Hestia is faced with a choice, and she must decide whether to tell Cale the truth or once again come up with some kind of excuse. The Marquis calmly and patiently awaits the heroine's answer while she thinks about what to say to her. And without thinking twice, the girl informs the hero that the reason is her hatred of the main characters of the novel, the Crown Prince and his wife, Diana. Hestia understands that stupid excuses will not work on her beloved because he is very smart and perceptive. And so the girl honestly said that she wanted to help Calus so that he would stop thinking about death. Helios and Diana greatly offended Hestia's beloved, and therefore she wants to force him to apologize to him. The girl wants the main characters to regret crossing Calus's path. The Marquis is so stunned by such a confession that he now simply remains silent and ponders everything he has heard. Such confessions will stun anyone and make them think for a long time. And then it turns out that the butler had already told the Marquis about Hestia's gift to see the future, and this was all just a test. Calus, of course, was very surprised by such words from his butler. And of course, this is hard to believe, so Cale at first thought that it was time for Uros to retire. But the butler believed in this for a reason. He has evidence that she knows something that is unknown to others. The girl even refused the Marquis' property, and this shows that she definitely does not need the Marquis' money. You can tell from Hestia's behavior and actions that she truly cares about Calus. The Marquis finally met a man who does not need wealth or status from him, but only to help him cope with his pain. Cale doesn't understand why a girl they've never met does so much for him. Hestia doesn't even know how to explain her desire to help Calus because he has no idea that he is her love. And the heroine understands that the truth sounds too strange and unrealistic, so she urgently needs to come up with a clear explanation. And Cale keeps pressing, insisting that she tell the truth about her reasons for helping him. The heroine is still trying to gather her thoughts so she can start explaining everything. The girl decided to start her excuses by asking whether Cale liked what she was doing. If the Marquis doesn't like something about her, then Hestia is ready to sign a divorce agreement at that very moment and leave his house. The girl realized that no matter what the answer was, she still remained only a third wheel for Cale, and if something did not suit him, then she could retreat. The girl's answer surprised Cale very much, and he didn't even immediately find what to answer. Calus decided not to comment on the girl's words, but simply changed the topic, saying that Helios had sent a letter. But since Hestia started it all, then she also needs to deal with it in this case. And Kale gave the girl every right to do what she wanted, and he would not interfere with it. The girl understands that now no one will stop her, and she will finally be able to avenge Kale. Having received permission from Kale himself, the girl immediately intends to go to a meeting with the crown prince. And in order for Helios to believe Hestia, the Marquis wrote a letter for her in confirmation. Just as the girl was unexpectedly called, she was also unexpectedly thrown out the door. And at the same moment that Hestia left Kale, the butler came running to her. Although Euros did not hear what the heroes were talking about, he immediately begins to apologize on behalf of his master, because he knows him very well. But it turns out that the butler apologized in vain, because nothing happened, and later he finds out that the heroine is going to go somewhere again. The girl says that she is going to go to a meeting with the crown prince, which is also part of her plan. Euros, as a competent worker, is ready to help the heroine and support her in everything. He immediately assumed that they would now prepare for this important meeting. But he would not be the only one to help, and in order to call the others for help, he immediately shouted loudly about the meeting of the Marchioness with the crown prince. Hearing the cry, many surprised girls who worked for the Marquis immediately came running. Everyone came running so quickly, enthusiastically rejoicing, that Hestia was even a little afraid of such pressure. The girls did their best, because in the end, the Marquise's outfit was so irresistible that the heroine herself was surprised by it. Hestia was waiting for an important meeting, so she had to look perfect in order to show her status with one look. However, the heroine was surprised not only by her appearance, but also by how everyone cares about her, even though she became the Marquise's wife recently and very suddenly. And the reason for such attention was that Hestia always tries to help Kale, and even returned his valuable land. So now all the Marquise's servants began to treat her with respect. The heroine was very seduced by the fact that she was trusted and loved even more than Saint Diana, the favorite of the entire novel. And Hestia, full of determination, goes to meet the most beautiful people in the novel, namely its main characters. But later, she realizes that she was too self-confident because she is far from Diana's beauty. Seeing how beautiful the main characters were, Hestia began to worry, but she understood that it was stupid to feel fear just because of their appearance, and tried to gather her strength. The main characters met the girl, not to say particularly friendly or welcoming, and immediately the Hestias start asking questions, asking if the main characters have met the girl before. And then the heroine begins to remember how she first saw Diana when she first appeared in the novel. Previously, Diana looked simple, in simple clothes, not as elegant as she does now. Diana is considered a saint because she can cure any disease with just her smile. Diana rightfully bears the title of saint because she is kind and helps absolutely everyone who turns to her. The modesty, kindness, and beauty of the saint makes everyone fall in love with her, without exception. But unfortunately, over time, Diana has changed, and now she no longer has everything that Hestia saw when they first met. When asked if they had met before, the heroine replied that she was clearly confused with someone. But in reality, this whole yoke made Hestia very happy, because the couple doesn't even know what she's up to and who she really is. The main characters took the guest to a beautiful room that looked very rich, which was understandable because she came to the crown prince himself. The girl did not wait long and immediately provided the main characters with a marriage document and a personal letter from the Marquis to prove that she was not a liar. The couple immediately recognized Kale's handwriting, so they can be absolutely sure that Hestia is not a liar. Diana reread all the documents provided by him and seemed to not believe her eyes. No one expected Kale to marry because he was always in love only with Diana and did not look at anyone else, even when the saint did not choose him. In addition, Kalus is not the kind of person who makes important decisions without thinking, because he is a very reasonable young man. But all the evidence suggests that Hestia is not lying, so all that remains is to accept that it is true. Kale got married, and this is a pure and irrefutable fact, because the contract, the letter, and the Marquis's carriage in which the girl arrived prove all this. Hestia remains pleased that the Crown Prince and Diana finally believed her. The moment they took in all the evidence, extreme surprise appeared on their faces, which amused Hestia greatly. The Crown Prince began his dialogue by telling the girl that even if she was the Marchioness, showing with these words that he still did not fully believe her. And he talks about how Hestia abused her power by taking the temple's land and threatening them. To this, the girl replies that there were no threats, and she does not understand what they are talking about. But Helios continues to maintain that these were definitely threats. But the girl was well prepared for this dialogue, so she immediately answers that the excessive use of her position did not come from her, but on the contrary, from the temple, because they simply took the land donated to Diana for themselves. Here Diana already enters into the dialogue, saying that the temple has no personal property, so there was no appropriation of land, because everything that is dedicated to the temple belongs to the gods. Hestia then had a question for Diana personally, because why, in this case, the saint uses her powers only for the sake of the imperial family. The saint stopped helping the common people, hiding behind the walls of the imperial castle and wealth. Diana left the commoners, even though she had previously been one of them, but the authorities alienated her from her roots. Now the saint does not save everyone, as she did before at the very beginning of the novel. And indeed, she uses the powers given to her by the gods the way they would like, because she has turned away from people who need help. To this, Diana can't even think of what to say in her own defense, because she understands that Hestia is right. And then her husband comes to the saint's rescue, telling the heroine to watch her language. Hestia decided to change tactics and begin to press for pity, but at the same time, she noted that she was not asking the prince at all, but he still answered for his wife without allowing her to say a word. The Marchioness's next question was whether the Crown Prince wanted Kale to donate his land to a temple in honor of the saint. The girl says that the Marquis was in love with Diana, and that was the only reason he donated his land. Hestia makes it clear that Kaelus's feelings for Diana are in the past, calling it old love. As a result, the married couple has nothing to answer to the words of the Marquise, because everything she said is the pure truth, and they know it. The heroine's plan is that she wants to explain all the old actions of her loved one so that he can quickly move on without thinking about the past. And although Hestia says that she is not offended by the Crown Prince and his wife, in her thoughts, she challenges herself, wanting to take revenge for her beloved. After all this dialogue, Helios looks very depressed, and it is clear that he is not happy about the girl's visit. The Crown Prince does not understand how the heroine was able to marry Kaelus, and even the day after his wedding to Diana. Then Hestia begins to explain to them that all people are different, and not everyone gets married only because of the fiery love that the Crown Prince and the saint had. But Helios still does not understand why Kaelus chose Hestia when there were always many girls from noble families around him. The heroine does not understand how one can treat people so horribly, choosing them as things. And then Hestia decided to inform the lovers that she, like Diana, has a superpower. The heroine told them that she could see the future. As Hestia had predicted, the Crown Prince did not believe her without proof. But Diana was amazed, because she was always sure that she was the only one so special in the whole world. But it turned out that she was not. And to prove it, Hestia decides to predict the future. Listening to this story afterwards, Kale became very interested in what she told them, to which the girl replied that she predicted the capture of a major robber, which worried the entire capital of the empire. Hestia shared that the Crown Prince did not believe her and called her a fraud. Then Kale asked what Diana said, because for the most part, Hestia talked about the Crown Prince. And the heroine began to talk about the saint while being very nervous because she knows about Kale's feelings. Marcus Kaelus listened carefully to everything his wife told him. And the girl noticed that since Kale asks about Diana, he is still thinking about her. But the young man was glad that the land, which he had already forgotten about, began to belong to him again. And he thanked Hestia for this act, because this way he began to feel at least a little better. The Marquis approaches the girl very close, saying that he wants to express his gratitude to her. He came too close, and Hestia even began to feel embarrassed about this, because Kale usually behaves more distantly. And the girl herself did not expect any thanks, because the fact that she sees her beloved and helps him is enough for her. Hestia's imagination works great, and she was already starting to come up with options for what Kale would do to thank her. And it all got to the point where the girl began to worry even more because of her ideas. And while the Marquise was soaring in the clouds, absorbed in her thoughts, Kale could only wonder what she was thinking about. As a result, the Marquis ran out of patience, and he clarified once again what she still wanted in order to understand at least a little what was going on in her head. The girl didn't expect any gratitude, so she doesn't even know what to ask. As a result, the girl decided that she wanted to hire a tutor and really surprised the Marquis with her choice. And she asked Kale if he had someone in mind, allegedly hinting at something. The girl said that she wanted to bring Madame Harmony from the salon. For some reason, Kalis clarified whether it really should be her, as if he was not satisfied with this choice of tutor. Hestia was surprised by Kale's reaction, because just an ordinary tutor caused too many emotions. And all because Madame Harmony, it turns out, is the aristocrat closest to Diana, which offended Kale. And then we learn that they began to treat Diana well, only after Kale poured deadly poison into two women who were against the saint. But Lady Diana, even now, is not loved by everyone in the novel, and there are still many nobles who continue to secretly hate her. Although there are many nobles who do not treat Diana very kindly. For some reason, Hestia chose as her tutor the one who, on the contrary, loves the main character. Madame Harmony is one of the few nobles who treated Diana well from the very beginning. She supported the saint in everything and helped her. It was Madame Harmony who taught Diana court etiquette and always encouraged her not to give up her love, and she was a spiritual mentor for the saint. Hestia understands that Madame will not be able to restrain herself and pretend that she knows nothing about the situation that is happening, and will definitely want to discuss it. And Diana, in order not to be in a precarious position, must enlist the support of the nobility as soon as possible. And that's why Hestia decided that she would get Harmony before Diana did. All this in order to avenge your loved one. Kaelis nevertheless agrees, realizing that he cannot refuse the girl due to the fact that he wanted to express his gratitude, and the promise cannot be taken back. It was clear from the girl's behavior that she was up to something, but Kale still didn't understand what exactly. Kaelis feels supported by Hestia, and he is very grateful to her for everything she does for him. The heroine is pleased that Kale notices all her efforts, because this means that she is not doing it in vain. Just gratitude, and the girl is already happy that Kale is showing his feelings for her. It's also nice for Hestia that the Marquis addressed her not as you, but as you. The heroine goes to bed with pleasant thoughts, because all her efforts were not in vain. The next morning, Hestia asked the butler to contact Madame Harmonia, whom the heroine wants to see as her tutor. The future tutor expressed a desire for their lessons to take place at her home, where Hestia could come at a time convenient for her. The girl decides in advance how she should behave in front of Madame in order to make a good impression on her. Since the heroine has read the novel she is currently in many times, she knows about the preferences of each hero and is completely confident in herself about this. And so, encouraging herself, Hestia went to meet Madame Harmonia. But the girl did not expect that she would have an appointment so soon, so she was already standing at the door of her tutor. The house the heroine found herself in looked magical, and she was greeted by a smiling and rather friendly young man. The girl was asked the purpose of the visit and her name, and then she introduced herself as Marquise Hestia. The rest of the people who were in the house, having heard who the heroine was, immediately began to whisper and gossip. Hestia felt that the eyes of everyone in the room were directed only at her, and because of this, she felt uncomfortable, because she was not used to such attention. The girl guessed that everyone already knew everything about her and what she had done. Hestia's only thoughts were that she wanted to get away from all these looks as quickly as possible. And then, like a life preserver, Madame Harmony appeared, which made the Marquise happy. Madame took the girl into a separate room, in which there were no other people, for which the heroine was very grateful. Harmony was surprised by the fact that the Marquise herself came to her, although usually high-born people call Madame to their home and do not visit her themselves. To which Hestia replied that all this was done only to express her serious intentions. In Diana, Madame was captivated by her honesty and modesty, and therefore the heroine decided to behave in a similar way in order to win the favor of Harmony. For effect, Hestia even began to cry in order to touch her tutor. Madame Harmony immediately rushed to the girl's aid, trying to calm her down and wanting to help. For the heroine, it was all just a game. And so far, her plan worked perfectly, because she was able to convincingly pretend to be the one who needed help. Hestia began to talk about Lord Elay, who was supposedly her stepfather, and then we understand that she came up with some kind of legend for Madame. Although the girl bought her title, she began to tell Harmony a completely different story about how she was adopted in order to be sent into secular society. And so, she told her tutor a perfectly crafted and sad story, which she passed off as her life. And Hestia concluded this tale by saying that she lacks a lot of knowledge, because the title of Marquise appeared too unexpectedly, and she does not know what to do now. Everything that the girl said amazed Madame, who was very deeply imbued with the fictitious story. Hestia temporarily became someone who Harmony would definitely like, having collected the best qualities in herself. And all this in order for Madame Harmony to agree to help her, and in the future to come over to her side. But instead of agreeing to help at that very second, as Hestia had hoped, Harmonia became thoughtful, as if she was unsure of something, and the girl already began to wonder what she had done wrong. But everything turned out to be much simpler, because Madame simply did not understand how the Marquis married Hestia. All this time, Madame's thoughts were focused only on how Cale got a wife. And if Harmony asked this, it means that she was interested in Hestia and her fate, and the heroine was striving for this. And then the girl said that she had long admired the Marquis and was always worried about him, dreaming of helping. Madame was delighted with how heroically the Marquise acted in saving Cale from the pain of a broken heart. And now the girl wants to repay Cale with kindness for agreeing to become her husband. And it was clear how Madame liked this heartbreaking story. And the girl even visited the temple for the sake of her beloved because she is very kind and grateful to Cale. The girl also showed her modesty, saying that she knows her place well and understands that she can't hold a candle to Diana. And this is how the girl managed to gain the favor of Madame Harmony. After listening to Hestia's story, Madame concluded that she was always ready to help a girl who was in a difficult situation. Madame immediately ran to create a plan for Hestia's training, and we were convinced that she was a wonderful character. Madame began to teach the girl everything she knew, and it turned out to be quite difficult for Hestia because there was too much information, but it was all necessary for her plan. A few days later, the maid Clarice brought news that the robber about whom the heroine had been predicted had been caught. And while the maid is happy that a dangerous criminal has been caught, Hestia is doing her homework, which never ends. And if the girl's prediction came true, it means that Diana and Helios will have to believe that Hestia can predict the future. While everything is going smoothly in terms of the heroine, she decided to ask how the Marquis was feeling, to which the maid became noticeably nervous. It turned out that Cale now had a guest, to which the girl was surprised, because it seemed that right now he was in no condition to host anyone. The girl, without thinking twice, asked if the guest's name was Hyperion, which amazed the maid, because it turned out to be true. Hyperion is not an ordinary person, because in fact, this is the name under which the crown prince is hiding, and Hestia immediately ran to her husband as soon as she learned this information. The crown prince came to the marquee in broad daylight, and no one even warned Hestia, which angered her. At the entrance to the marquis's room, the heroine encounters the butler, who explains his presence at the door by saying that he was simply worried that something might go wrong. Hestia tells Uros not to apologize because she understands him perfectly. The butler tells the girl that nothing but conversation has happened so far, and then they hear some noise. Running into the room, the girl finds a picture in which Kale is standing with his hand bleeding due to hitting the glass. The girl immediately ran up to her beloved, asking him what happened, and at that time, the butler began to call the doctor. While Hestia was trying to help Kyle, Helios approached him, but he did not have time to say anything because the heroine drove him away, blaming him for what happened to the marquis. The crown prince listened to the girl and left, finally apologizing to Kaelis. It was clear how much Marquis was in pain, but there was nothing else to do but wait for the doctor. Kale was given medical assistance, and now he was lying on the bed, and his wife was sitting next to him. The wound turned out to be shallow and appeared due to the fact that the Marquis hit the glass in a fit of emotion, and the girl became curious about what Kaelis was talking about with the crown prince. The Marquis thought that the girl had foreseen his meeting with Helios, to which she replied that she did not see such details. It turns out that the hero did not want to host the crown prince, and he admits that if it had been his will, he would never have met him. Heli, when he came to the Marquis, began to ask about his condition, and in response, Kale asked the crown prince if he was enjoying his honeymoon. But the main character of the novel was not going to answer this, because he came only to ask questions. The crown prince immediately began trying to talk about the Marquis's wife, who seemed too suspicious to him. According to Kale, there is no point in being careful in life, so it doesn't matter who you get married to and how wrong it is. And then Helios heard a confession that discouraged him because the Marquis admitted that he wanted to die on the wedding day of the main characters. And he added that it was Hestia who saved him from this. And what does the prince care who the hero chose to marry? Helios was offended that Kale did not share his pain with him because they are friends and should tell each other everything, while again making the Marca guilty. The crown prince also added that Kale has changed a lot, and it will be painful for Diana to see the hero like this because she worries about him. The mention of Diana was unnecessary because it upset Kale even more due to the fact that the girl did not send a single letter. Now we know what exactly made the Marquis angry because talking about Diana was a bad idea. While Hestia and Kailas were alone, the young man decided to open his heart to the girl, telling him exactly why he wanted to commit suicide. The young man admitted that at first he was upset because he could not die. But in the end, thanks to the girl, he was able to realize a lot. Meanwhile, Helios told Diana that their mutual friend, Kale, decided to commit suicide on their wedding day, but Hestia was able to stop him. And Diana began to worry that there was too much evidence of Hestia's superpowers. The crown prince and the saint decided that they must reveal the true goals of Kaelis's wife. And then we moved to the girls' tea party, among whom was Hestia. We learned that a few days ago, the Marquise received an invitation to a tea party with Countess Aranis. Countess Aranis turned out to be an active person, which is not inferior in authority to Madame Harmony. The heroine understands that she was invited only because of curiosity about her person, but she is still very nervous, because if she screws up, she will have problems. The main problem of the heroine is that she knows practically nothing about Countess Aranis, because in the novel, she was only a minor character. Even Madame Harmony noticed the girl's excitement and wanted to help her cope with this situation. Although Hestia does not know how to behave correctly in front of Aranis, she cannot simply turn away from the invitation. But the heroine is ready to do everything to help Kale. And these words surprised Harmony that even in such a difficult situation, she thinks about her husband. She can't refuse the invitation because rumors will spread later. So this option is out of the question. But fortunately, Madame is ready to help her with this situation. That's how the girl got to this tea party. Hestia is very worried because she is sitting among strangers and does not even know how to behave correctly. And then all the girls' attention turned to the marquise, and she was lucky that she knew at least a couple of techniques that Madame taught her. Although the Countess will look down on Hestia, Harmonia was able to teach her behavior that could help the heroine please all the ladies who will be at the tea party. The heroine needs to behave politely, modestly, and say what the ladies want to hear. Flattery helped Hestia to please everyone present at the tea party. The girl answered all the questions that were asked to her, but she told everything in such a way that it amazed the ladies. And then Hestia was asked how she felt about the fact that Calus had been in love with Diana for a long time. And Harmonia also spoke about such a tactless question and prepared the heroine on how to answer correctly. Everyone expected Hestia to react to this question with anger, but she was ready, so she controlled herself. Although this tea party was difficult for the girl, it was useful for her because she learned that many ladies did not like Diana. The girl also interested others because she was at the imperial palace, which added even more respect to her person. Hestia had the advantage of a diary that recorded all the major events in the original so that the heroine knows all the important moments that will happen. And now the girl comes up with a plan for what she will do next and how this diary can help her with this. And then the heroine remembered one moment that would certainly stun Diana and cripple her. From the very morning, Hestia was already in a hurry to Cale to tell him her plan and ask him for permission. But then the girl began to doubt whether she could just walk into Cale's room. And in the end, she simply found Uros so that he could ask everything for her. She still got to her beloved and told him that she wanted to visit the wife of the crown prince. The Marquis asked if Diana invited her or if she herself decided to visit her, to which he received the answer that the visit was Hestia's decision. After the girl told Marquis the plan, she expected his reaction, but he simply accepted it and did not say anything, even though Hestia expected any reaction from Cale other than this. Outwardly, it seemed that the hero no longer cared about Diana, and he was even surprised that for the sake of such simple news, the girl had to bother Euros. The Marquis gave Hestia advice so that she should no longer bother the servants about such nonsense, but simply come in on any occasion. This question turns out to have been raised by the butler, asking if the Marquise could come to Cale herself and not ask the servants to report this. The hero was surprised that before the heroine burst into his place without asking, and now she involves Uros in this, and therefore the butler asked his master to personally allow Hestia to come when she needs. Calus thought that this permission would make the Marquise happy, but he presented the information so ignorantly that the girl only became upset, and all because she decided that she was only causing inconvenience to others because she began to bother Uros for the sake of her comfort. And then, when Cale had already decided that the girl had asked everything and was ready to leave. But before leaving, Hestia asked her husband to borrow his ring with a pink diamond. The girl began to try with all her might to persuade the Marquis to do this, promising to be careful with the ring and just for a day. But her lover replied that she should always wear this ring and gave it to her. Cale gave the girl the ring, surprising her, due to the fact that he no longer had a mistress. The diamond on this ring was chosen to match Diana's soft pink hair, and for the Marquis, it was a precious wedding gift that he wanted to give to his beloved. Hestia's gratitude cannot be described in words because this ring was very valuable to her husband, and so he gave it to her. Cale noticed that when the heroine left to go to the saint, she had such a face as if she wanted to kill someone. The heroine sent a letter about an audience to the crown prince's wife and almost immediately received an answer and went to the meeting. The girl came up with the perfect plan to end Helios and also used the ring to reproach Diana. Hestia was still very happy thanks to the first gift from her lover, and she didn't care that it was originally intended for Diana. And this ring gives the heroine hope that her husband has already abandoned his feelings for Diana. Here the Marquise's thoughts are interrupted by Diana, who came and apologized for the wait. The girl's plan comes to fruition, and she already expects to see the saint's distorted face. Hestia thanks the crown prince's wife for agreeing to the meeting, to which Diana replies that it is all because of her curiosity, pretending that she is not interested in their dialogue. In her thoughts, the heroine was dissatisfied with being treated with disdain, but still told the saint that she assured her of her good attitude. And then Diana notices the same ring that was made for her, but it was received by her wife Marquise, who immediately noticed that the ring was recognized. The girl eagerly awaited the reaction of the main character, but in the end, she only received a radiant smile, as if the saint was pretending that she had not noticed anything. But Hestia cannot be fooled so easily. She still noticed that the saint was touched by the ring, and she was simply pretending to be unperturbed. Suddenly, the heroine hands Diana an envelope containing a letter for her, and in it is something that the crown prince should prepare for the future, because the girl has already proven that she can see the future. The Marquise told about enemy troops who, after checking the defenses, were going to attack the country. Last time Helios had a lot of problems because of the attack, but this time everything will be different because he was warned by Hestia. Also, last time people discussed that Helios agreed to peace under very unfavorable conditions, and Caelus would have handled it much better because he was an outstanding diplomat. The saint was surprised by the fact that such important news was told to her and not to the crown prince. To which Hestia said that she would like to know when the crown prince was going to hold the next tea party, which infuriated the saint. Diana began to say that this was too much because the date of the tea party and its invitees were kept secret. Madame Harmony's lessons were not in vain, and the heroine was quickly able to pretend that she regretted what she said. Diana quickly realized her mistake because the information about the tea party was not even close to what Hestia brought. It turned out that the date for the tea party had not yet been chosen, but as soon as something was known about it, the saint would immediately send a letter to Cael's wife. Afterwards, Diana reminded that she is the crown princess of the country, so she will not tolerate such treatment, because you need to be more polite when addressing her. Hestia saw how much everyone's beloved saint had changed, because now she has the power that changes people. And then Diana could not bear it and asked about the ring, and the heroine immediately began to brag and praise Caelus in order to put the saint in an awkward position. While the heroine was talking about how caring her husband was, and when he managed to get such a rare stone, Diana did not know whether to say that it was originally a gift just for her. Hestia noticed that the saint had turned very pale and asked if it was because the jewel the heroine was showing was not magnificent enough for her eyes, which put her in a more difficult position. The crown princess stuttered a lot while trying to answer something, and Hestia only made everything worse by saying that the color of the stone was very similar to the saint's hair. And then the Marquise allegedly guessed that this ring was intended for Diana, and shouted this in surprise, expecting a response from Helios's wife. But Diana remained silent, not talking about the fact that the ring was made for her, which puzzled the heroine. However, Hestia did not stop trying to find out information about the decoration, pretending that she was very hurt by the whole situation. And the saint hastened to reassure the Marquise, saying that Cael did not want to offend her and did not mean anything bad. Diana was cast as a villain, which was very unusual for her, and she began to apologize to Hestia. Afterwards, the crown princess thanked the heroine because she saved Cael's life, to which the Marchioness replied that she was glad that she was able to help the person dear to her. Hestia noticed how strange Diana's state had become as she squeezed out words that included a request to protect Cael as long as the heroine could. The girl was glad that she was able to piss off the crown prince's wife. As soon as the Marchioness returned, she immediately told the butler how the audience with the crown princess had gone. Hestia knows that when the Marquis is upset, he reads light novels, which once again surprised the butler with her knowledge of Cael. After the dialogue with the butler, the girl immediately hurried to tell everything to her lover, who, in turn, first of all asked about Diana. Then Caelus remembered that Hestia sees the future and asked if the saint was happy in the future, and the girl was puzzled by such a question. The Marquise understands that she is not yet able to answer this question because she knows that the saint will soon cease to appear as such, because she will lose her healing ability. Last time, after the death of Kailis, the country faced a crisis. The marriage of the main characters began to collapse, and Diana lost her gift, losing her status as a saint. After that, everyone turned away from the main character because she became an ordinary girl, and the crown prince paid almost no attention to her because he was tired of political issues. The girl was faced with the question of whether to tell her beloved about everything or keep it a secret. The girl was worried that Kailis might return to Diana, and he, as if reading her thoughts, replied that he no longer had feelings for the saint, but the Marquise understands that all this is just a lie. And then the heroine decided to tell her that Diana would soon lose her ability to heal and cease to be a saint, which shocked Kale. Hestia admitted that the abilities would disappear not only from the main one, but also from the girl herself, and she would no longer be able to see the future. Kale suggested that his wife would lose her abilities due to death, saying this very directly and sharply, but the heroine admitted that she was not sure about this. There are no more than 2 years left until the end of the girl's memories, but she doesn't worry about it, because the main thing for her is to have time to complete all the planned tasks, and there is no need to worry about Diana, because even though she will lose her abilities, she herself will be alive and well. The Marquis abruptly leaves, telling Hestia to forget about their dialogue and just leave. And because of this, the girl begins to worry that she said something wrong. Afterwards, Hestia comes to Madame Harmonia, and she notices that the heroine does not look very good. The reason for which is that the girl has not slept well in recent days, because during this time, there has been no news from either Kale or Diana. Harmony assumed that Hestia was in such a state because of her visit to the crown princess, and then the girl told the Marquise the story of the ring. Hestia said that she was worried that Diana was trying to separate her from Kailis in order to make the saint appear duplicitous in front of Madame. But Harmony came to the defense of the crown prince's wife, saying that she could not have acted so cruelly because Diana is a loyal person who helps people, which means this is just some kind of misunderstanding. Then the heroine realized that Madame loved Diana very much, and there was no way to turn her against the saint. And in the end, Harmony decided that she would request an audience with Diana and talk to her personally to sort everything out. Madame was able to calm down and go home, but this really exhausted Hestia, and the girl went to the garden to unwind. An unexpected meeting took place in the garden because the girl ran into her beloved, who was holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands. After the heroine appeared in Kale's life, he began to feel better, and he even started doing floristry. The butler tried his best to support his master and brought him many flowers so that the Marquess would not abandon this matter. We learn that Kale received a letter from the Crown Prince, which says that thanks to Hestia's prediction, it was possible to prevent a crisis on the border and save the country. Kailis does not understand why the girl saved him when her predictions are so strong, and she spent them on a Marquess unfamiliar to her. Having met Hestia in the garden, Kale gives her a bouquet that he collected himself while he was doing floristry, and the girl was very amazed by this, because before that, he had never given her flowers. And then Kale also says that he wants to say something to the heroine, and at this moment, common sense gradually begins to leave Hestia, because her beloved is so good. The Marquise began to figure out where her husband got the bouquet, but she was still not ready to believe that he could give it to her. But Kale, noticing the girl's look at the flowers and deciding that she really liked them, still gives them. Hestia was so happy after this that even Uros came running to help her. This is how the girl found out that her beloved was engaged in floristry, and also that he wanted to talk to her. But seeing her condition, he decided to postpone everything until later. But the Marquise persuaded her to continue the dialogue and now stood in admiration of the bouquets that her husband had made. But then she remembered that there were no such scenes in the novel and began to worry about it. The young man noticed the change in the heroine's mood and decided that the reason for this was her anxiety. Thanks to his thoughts, Kale began to smile, and this was noticed by Hestia, who, although she did not know why, was glad that he was smiling. And then Kailis again attempted to tell the girl important news, although she decided that their dialogue was already over. The Marquis wanted to find out information about why the girl saved him, because there must be some reason for this. As a result, a misunderstanding arose, during which Hestia decided that Kale had guessed about her love for him, and the hero himself thought that he was an important person in the future. And so there was an awkward pause due to the fact that the heroine inadvertently revealed all her feelings to the Marquis, deciding that he already understood everything. And Kailis himself only asked why she called him her favorite and what it meant, clearly not yet fully understanding what he had just heard. Hestia realized that she had spilled the beans and now doesn't know how to get out of the situation she had gotten herself into. Kailis begins to delve into the meaning of this word, trying to understand what it means that he was called a favorite. And unable to withstand the Marquis's inquisitive gaze, the girl admits that she called him her most beloved person. The Marquise tried to get out of the situation, but it was too late, because no matter what she said, everything led to the fact that she was in love. However, the hero decided that Hestia was in love not with him, but with flowers, and promised that he would give them more often. And that's how the heroine got away with it, which she was happy about. And after that, they began a dialogue in which Kale wanted to discuss something. And, as it turned out, the topic of discussion was the abilities of the Marquise. Kale began to reason that Hestia could change the present, and therefore the future, which could be very useful. If you change events one after another, the future will also change, and this is a very important moment for the characters, because everything that happened last time can change. The Marquis is still sure that the heroine saved him only because he will be needed in some important event in the future. But because of Kale's death, he had practically no effect on anything. It's just that the heroine herself decided that if he was alive, then everything would be much better, so you can't agree to his question. Due to Hestia's long silence, the Marquis decided that the heroine was simply having a hard time talking about it, while in reality, she was just figuring out what the best answer would be. Hestia admitted that nothing would have changed if she had not saved him that day. And after that, the Marquis began to think that his life means nothing and does not change anything, which means that all this is meaningless. So the Marquis again began to think about death, because he decided that there was no point in living any longer, he would not change anything, and would not become an outstanding or great person. Hestia understands what Kale is talking about, because he is a minor character, which means he is not as important as the main characters, who receive almost all the attention, while the others simply end up in their shadow. But the heroine decides to convince the Marquis, telling him that he does not have to change the world in order to be great, because it is enough just to become the meaning of life for one person. Then Hestia admitted that Kale is the meaning of life for her, and she considers him great because she loves him. The butler came running to the heroine's cry, wondering what was going on with the heroes and what they were doing, and at the same time informing them that dinner was ready. And then the Marquis began to laugh loudly, surprising Hestia and the butler, who did not understand what caused the laughter. The Marquis immediately thought that in the novel, Salis laughed only next to Diana. Hestia thought he was laughing because she made herself look stupid, but she was willing to accept it as long as he was happy in the end. Stopping laughing, Kale turned to Uros and said that he wanted to ask him something, to which the butler immediately responded. Kailis's request was that the butler provide him and his wife Hestia with a pleasant dinner. But the girl was so worried that she could not even appreciate the taste of the food that was brought to her. But even in such an awkward situation, the heroine was glad that Kale laughed and she saw him from different sides. Hoping that thanks to her, Marquis felt better, The girl thought that she would finally be able to sleep normally without worrying about anything. But when Hestia entered her room, she was so amazed by what she saw that she froze in one place, unable to move. The girl saw something that she obviously did not expect to see in her room. After all, the Marquise's room was filled with flowers, and she was surprised, not knowing what it all meant. And then the girl sees the bouquet of flowers that Kale made, and realized that it was his idea. Hestia remembered that before this, her beloved had promised to give her more flowers if she liked them so much. Now it is clear what exactly the Marquis asked the butler for, but the girl decided that it was definitely not Kale who asked to bring such a number of flowers, but Uros himself. It didn't matter whose idea it was. The heroine was pleased with such attention in any case. While Hestia was enjoying the flowers, Kaelis stood in his room, thinking about everything that had happened before. And so we see the girl at work again. This time, she writes a short letter about the current situation, because there was no answer from Diana, and the heroine was unable to contact the Countess. It turns out that there will be a banquet, and the Marquise is not sure if they are ready to host this banquet. The letter has already been written. All that remains is to send it and then find Uros, because she cannot sort out the flowers herself. There were too many flowers, but Hestia really likes it, because now she can constantly admire them. But instead of Uros, Hestia found only piles of papers with which the entire table was littered. Because of so many papers, the girl did not even notice at first that there was a butler among them. Uros looked very tired and sick, and all he said was that his owner should be taken care of, although he seemed to need care first of all. Then the heroine began to try to wake Uros so that he would come to his senses. When he woke up, Uros admitted that he slept less than 3 hours a day due to the large amount of work. While Hestia was worried about Uros, he was worried about the fact that he looked shameful, not even thinking that he shouldn't put such a burden on himself. Due to his master's inability to take care of his own affairs, the butler has to work on his behalf. But Hestia noticed that Uros was fine until yesterday and asked what happened. It turned out that the butler only dealt with urgent matters, and before this, there was no such thing that he slept 3 hours a day. It was surprising that Hestia made Kale laugh, because before his laughter could be heard very rarely, which means the heroine can somehow command the Marquis. And in this case, Uros invited Hestia to take care of the housekeeping on the estate, but the problem was that the girl had never done anything like that before. Later, the girl also suggested that the young man would not allow this, to which Uros said that he was ready to ask him this right now. And at that moment, the Marquis himself was holding a tea ceremony on his terrace. And as soon as Hestia found out about this, there was no trace of her because she instantly ran to her beloved. While important issues were being resolved, Kayla sat alone on the terrace and drank tea in a relaxed position. The hero asked the Marquise what happened, to which she replied that she came running because urgent questions arose. In response to this, Kailas invited the girl to drink tea with him, which he was just about to pour, which Hestia, of course, was happy about, but then realized that there was no time for that. The heroine had to run, so at the moment, she could hardly say anything due to the fact that she first needed to catch her breath. When Hestia refused tea, Kale asked if she liked tea, to which she responded positively, and then began to wonder how she could refuse tea with her beloved. But the Marquis did not let her think, who told her to forget about tea and sit down, because she needed to talk. Hestia was very upset by the fact that she refused to drink tea with her loved one, but nothing could be done. And while the heroine was sad because of the missed opportunity, Kale asked her why exactly she was looking for him. Then the girl noticed that her husband's gaze softened and became less cold, and the Marquis began to look at Hestia differently. But then Hestia realized that her gaze was not soft, but simply studying, as if she were some kind of extraordinary insect. However, this look is still better than the lifeless one before, which means Kale's condition is getting better. Sitting opposite her beloved, the heroine thinks about how she would like to forget yesterday. But in the end, the girl collected her thoughts and remembered to tell the Marquis about Euros's desire for her to take care of the estate. Caelus knew that the butler had a lot of work, so he was not even surprised by this proposal because it is difficult for Euros to do everything alone. The Marquis took this as a hint that he had been slacking off for a very long time, but the girl insisted that she wanted to help him herself. But if the hero turns out to be against it, then the Marquise will no longer demand this. Then Hestia heard Cael's confession that before he could not entrust the work to others and did everything himself. But now the Marquis lives freely and does not understand why he did not allow himself to live like this in the past. The heroine would like to lighten Cael's burden and help him in everything. It was unusual for Cael to hear this, because before that few people had shown him such care. The couple sat opposite each other, and each was thinking about something different. Ultimately, the girl managed to persuade her lover, and he allowed her to help the butler. Now Cael also decided to share his news and said that a letter had arrived from Hyperion. The girl was not happy that Helios again needed something from Cael, because last time everything ended in tears. But after seeing the text of the letter, Hestia realized that it was not written for Caelus at all. This message turns out to be for the Marchioness herself. And in it, the Crown Prince writes that he would like to meet the girl in person because her abilities helped him a lot. The heroine wanted to use her knowledge only for her lover, and now she was thinking of simply refusing the prince's invitation. But before refusing, she decided to ask what the Marquis's opinion was on this matter. Cael does not understand why the heroine needs his opinion, but the girl explains this by saying that she is now a Marchioness, and this letter is from the Crown Prince. And the fact that they are dating in secret could lead to a lot of strange rumors. The hero was amused by the girl's confidence that he would not be able to find out about the secret meeting. The Marquise was so struck by the words spoken by Cael that she seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. After some time, the meaning of everything that her beloved said came to her. And at that very moment, she was very indignant because she did not want to do anything without the knowledge of her beloved. Hestia is also unhappy with the fact that she will have to see the Crown Prince because he offended Cael. Cael, meanwhile, silently ponders everything that his wife just told him. And in Marquis's thoughts, there are also memories of the day when Diana confessed to him that she was in love with someone else, his best friend, Helios. The saint then claimed that no one could hate the Crown Prince, and here in front of him sits a girl who cannot stand him. It was clear how difficult it was for the girl to make a choice about inviting Helios because there was too much at stake. Meanwhile, Caelus thinks about how different Diana and Hestia are, and this makes him smile imperceptibly. The choice was made at the moment when Cael said that the girl had better go to the meeting, and then she still decided to accept the invitation. The heroine constantly calls her husband Marquis, and so he could not resist and asked her if this irritates her. The young man asks to call him by name because no one calls Hestia the wife of the Marquis. Then there is no need to constantly call him the Marquis. Because of these words, the girl became embarrassed, and the fact that her beloved was as close as possible made the situation only worse. For the first time, Hestia addresses the Marquis by name very quietly, timidly, as if afraid of saying something wrong. And when the girl realized that nothing would happen to her for saying the name, she gave herself free rein and shouted it out at the top of her lungs. Caelus did not expect this and looked in surprise at Hestia, who was recovering from a loud scream. After this, the girl quickly retreated, leaving the Marquis alone with his thoughts. It seems that when the heroine screamed, she scared Cael so much that he even spilled the tea, and only now noticed it. Hestia once again made the young man smile in these few days, which means that her plan is working and the Marquis is on the mend. Meanwhile, the girl, in embarrassment, tried to run as far away from her lover as possible so as not to worry even more. Here the attention turns to Helios, who is looking at the heroine's room like some kind of museum. Hestia is not very happy about meeting the Crown Prince, but she was forced to agree to it. Helios came not as the Crown Prince, but on behalf of Hyperion, so I had to meet him right in the room and not in the open living room. Hestia's exploration of her room never stopped, and she was already starting to get very angry about it. Then the crown prince noticed the girl's documents on the table and asked if she was responsible for the internal affairs of the Marquis, to which Hestia gave a positive answer. It turned out that the Marquise had many amazing talents, and this surprised the main character. And then Hestia was offered to use her power for the good of the country because the heroine had already saved her once. But in response to this, the heroine only replied that she would pretend that she had not heard these words. The Marquise explained that for her now, her husband's health comes first, so she's going to focus on him and running the household. Although the crown prince tried to prove to the girl that household affairs are not more important than the country's problems, the heroine said that her foresight did not concern state affairs. Then Helios asked why she told about the attack, to which the Marquise replied that it was done for the sake of information about the date of Her Majesty's tea party. The main character tried to threaten Hestia, but she noticed that today she had a meeting with Mr. Hyperion, not the prince, so she had nothing to fear. According to the man, it is very selfish for the heroine to use her power only for personal gain. Hestia noticed that the crown prince abandoned his friend, who is her husband, alone, and now she can't help but think about it, because she loves Kale very much. His Highness wants to somehow take over the initiative in the conversation, because the one with whom he is conducting a dialogue does not mince words. And then suddenly, Helios starts coughing after drinking the tea, and as it turns out, this is because the drink tastes exactly the same as when Diana brews it. Even a saint has shortcomings, for example. She does not know how to brew tea, and instead she produces tasteless water. At first, Hestia was angry that her tea was compared to the most tasteless in the entire novel. But then the heroine tried it herself, and all the indignation disappeared. In any case, Helios did not want to lose the knowledge that the Marquise had, so he asked what she wanted. Then the girl demanded the land of the late Duke Orcus, as well as to raise the status and title of her husband. Hestia wanted to show that she was the opposite of Diana, and at the same time emphasize that Kale was not to blame for the death of Duke Orcus's daughter. I wondered if the crown prince would be able to meet these demands for the sake of important information. But to answer this question, one must consult with the emperor because Helios himself cannot decide this. The heroine didn't care about all this because the main thing was that her demands were met, and only then she would share her abilities. Although Helios understands that it will be difficult to find a reason to fulfill these conditions, he agrees to them and is even going to promise in writing to fulfill them. The crown prince accepted the terms without further clarification, which greatly pleased the heroine. While everyone looks down on Hestia, she plans to elevate Kailas to the very skies of this empire. And the next day, the Marchioness finally received a letter from Diana, which said what the date of the tea party would be. As soon as Hestia received a letter from Diana about the tea party, she immediately came to Countess Erinys to tell about it. The Countess was flattered by the personal visit of the Marchioness, so the women developed good, friendly relations. It turned out that Diana wants to hold a meeting with all the nobles at once, because she would like to hold as few such meetings as possible. And if there are a lot of people, then the crown prince's wife will most likely need the help of Madame Harmony. The countess did not like the presence of a madam in the secular world who had the same influence. Hestia realized that the countess liked her, so she decided to take advantage of this fact. Then the heroine said that she did not understand why Madame was helping Diana at such an important event. And once again, the Marquise was helped by flattery, because she began to tell the Countess that it would be better for Diana to choose Erinys to help in such an important event. The Countess replied that she also thought so, and therefore was glad that she had found someone who understood her so much. However, Her Majesty does not trust the nobles due to the flood that happened last year because they did not take care of the citizens. During that flood, the saint first asked the king to help the people, but when she did not achieve anything, she switched to the nobles. The nobles could not do anything, And then it was Helios and Kale who helped Diana. It was in caring for the victims of the flood that the love of Helios and his current wife was born and strengthened. And at that time, Kale was drawing up documents in place of the crown prince. Afterwards, Hestia added that if the Countess wishes, the heroine will be able to make a couple of cracks in the walls of His Majesty's castle. A plan was devised in which the Marchioness would make Diana look bad at the tea party, and then the Countess would intervene and rescue Her Majesty, after which their relationship would improve. And in exchange for this, Erinys must become Hestia's guardian in the secular world, like a companion. The Countess is still thinking about the Marquise's proposal, but the girl is sure that Erinys will definitely agree. All the socialites are now on the side of the Marquise, which could not but rejoice. In addition, when the girl returned home, she received Helios's letter of appointment and an imperial pass, which means that His Majesty most likely urgently needs the heroine's gift. It remains to find out how things are going with Diana's preparations for the reception, and this can be done when Hestia goes to predict. It will even be possible to talk with the servants. And then Hestia began to choose an event that could be predicted in order to go to the imperial palace as quickly as possible. But before telling Helios about this prediction, the Marquise initially decided to share everything with her husband. Hestia fell asleep thinking that tomorrow everything would go as well as today. The next day, the girl did not understand how it happened that she and her lover were traveling together in a carriage. It so happened that the girl once again went to tell Kale about her plans, and he asked whether she would go to the castle. And before that, the Marquis was doing a curly haircut, which surprised Hestia, because he did it well. Kale reiterated that his wife did not have to answer to him, but she explained that she did not want what she was about to tell Helios to be just between Hestia and the crown prince. But what should the heroine do if her lover does not want to hear what she wants to talk about? And then she added that in this case, she will not say anything. However, the Marquis was only worried about the fact that Hestia called him Mr. Kailas, which seemed strange to the man, because she could simply call him by name. Afterwards, Kale wondered what information the heroine would tell the crown prince first, and the heroine said that it would be the news that His Majesty the Emperor would soon fall. As it turned out, the Emperor had an unknown illness, and therefore Diana poured all her healing powers on him day and night. And the moment the Emperor falls, the saint uses her powers for the last time. It was unknown whether this message could somehow prevent what was about to happen, but then everyone would be ready for any outcome. Kailas lost his parents at an early age, so together with his best friend Helios, he greatly respected the Emperor and was devoted to him. And His Majesty, in turn, considered Kale practically his own son and was delighted with him. And it was at that moment that the Marquis said that he would go to the castle with his wife. Because of this unexpected desire from her lover, the heroine was still in shock. However, the girl was not only surprised, but also very frightened, because she did not know how Kale would behave if she met Diana. The Marquis, in turn, seemed to read the thoughts of his betrothed, and told the heroine not to worry about the fact that the young man's feelings for Diana would flare up again, because he was going to the Emperor and not to his past love. Then Hestia explained to her lover that it was not so important to her what he felt. The main thing was that he did not repeat the mistakes that he had made that the heroine had seen before. After all, the heroine herself may disappear in 2 years, but at the moment, her goal is to make Diana and Helios regret. Kale decided that they could both go about their business and go back at different times. But the Marquise was afraid that her husband might become ill and she would not be able to help him. This offended the man because he is not a child and he is not that weak, so he can handle everything himself. In the end, the heroes really went separately, and Hestia noticed that this behavior was so similar to how the Marquis behaved from the original novel. While Hestia was in the clouds, she suddenly heard a dialogue between the maids, in which they discussed the scale of Diana's tea party. The servants were unhappy with the way the tea party would be conducted, and the Marquise realized that something was clearly wrong. And then one of the workers blurted out that she was already tired of watching Madame Merope and Diana quarrel every day. Madame Merope is a lady-in-waiting who served the departed empress, and she is the most experienced figure in the palace. And Hestia was glad that Diana could not get along with such an important woman for the palace. In a good mood, the heroine went to the crown prince, who was surprised by such a quick visit. While the heroine was thinking about how to more carefully tell Helios information about his father, he reprimanded her, saying whether it was normal to look at others so closely when there was a husband. Due to the crown prince's impoliteness, the heroine stopped trying to convey the information softly and simply bluntly said that His Majesty the Emperor would soon fall. Helios began to argue with the girl, arguing that at the last examination, the doctor did not notice anything strange about his father. But Hestia added that she did not know the exact cause or day of the incident, and she simply told what she saw in the future. Then the crown prince asked if there was any way to prevent this, to which Hestia replied that although she could not give a guarantee, she advised always keeping someone close to the emperor in order to immediately assist him. Although the saint used her power on the emperor every evening, the fact of his fall confirms that every life has a deadline, even with the support of divine forces. And then the chief chamberlain of the Palace of Lilies, Zeno, appears with the words that His Majesty called him. Then Helios ordered him to immediately go to the emperor and added that he himself would also come soon. Afterwards, the crown prince wanted Diana to also approach his father, but Hestia forbade him because she knew that Chaol was there at the moment, and she would not want him to meet the one who broke his heart. As it turned out, Helios's wife had already gone to the emperor to have tea with him. While the heroes hurried to the imperial palace, the crown prince asked Hestia whether the cause of his father's death could be poisoning, hinting at how terrible the tea Diana brews. Meanwhile, the main character of the novel was glad that she would finally be able to talk to the emperor. And then Diana notices the last person she expected to see, because it turned out to be Chaol. In the end, what Hestia feared happened, because her lover met the one he had loved for many years. After some time, the Marquise ran to the palace, and when Chaol saw her, he said that he told the girl not to come for him. But then the young man noticed that the crown prince had also come running to the palace with his wife, which did not make him happy. And so the Marquis grabbed Hestia by the hand in order to leave this place as quickly as possible. At this moment, the heroine realizes that her beloved has finally met the saint. The girl couldn't even imagine what Chaol was feeling right now, but she could only guess, because the man didn't show that he was in pain. Then Hestia tries to cheer up Chaol, telling him that he is holding up well. But the Marquis took her words negatively, saying that the heroine knows nothing, because her ability does not allow her to see through people. And after the man's words, the girl apologized to him, knowing that Chaol just needed to throw out his emotions. This evening, Hestia decided to drink a couple of glasses of wine, thinking that she should not have allowed her lover into the palace in the first place. After all, the Marquise understands that Diana was most likely careless in her interactions with the Marquis. After this meeting, Chaol was silent for the rest of the time, and although Eros was looking after him, Hestia also wanted to go and see him, but was afraid. Chaol's office is so close to the heroine that you can see it from the balcony, but his heart is incredibly far away. And then the girl notices that she was not the only one who came out to admire the night sky. Maybe Chaol came out at such a late hour to kill himself again, and that's why Hestia quickly ran to him. Running to her husband, the heroine first met Eros, and he said that her lover just wanted to get some fresh air. Then, with a lighter heart, the girl was about to leave. But Chaol stopped her, and Eros asked her to leave. And while Hestia was nervous that the butler left her alone with the Marquis, he came too close to her. It turned out that Chaol wanted to apologize to the heroine for what happened during the day, because then he was harsh with her. Shy Hestia was still able to ask how her beloved was doing now, to which the man replied that he took a little nap and now he is much better. Hestia is very embarrassed by how close Kale is, because this is how she sees all his beauty. And so the hero asked why she doesn't look at him, and the reason is that this will make her worry even more. And then Marquis said that he saw his wife drinking wine on the terrace, which means that he saw her inappropriate behavior when she was emotionally talking to herself and drinking straight from the bottle. But instead of condemnation, Hestia only received an offer from Kale to have a glass with him. The heroine began to feel like she was in a dream, because at the moment, she was drinking wine with her beloved late at night in his office. In the end, the girl decided that since she had such an opportunity, she was going to admire Kale to the fullest. Because of her thoughts, Hestia turned all red, and then the Marquis came closer to her to find out what caused this and what happened. And then, in order to dispel the romance of the moment, the heroine asked her husband if Diana had any reaction to her meeting with Kale. In the end, the girl realized that this was not the best question, but the Marquis had already begun to tell how the saint was momentarily amazed. But then she came to her senses and began to treat her old friend as before. Then the crown prince's wife and Kale went to the emperor together, but the man hardly spoke to his majesty because the saint took all his attention. Kale was disappointed that no matter what he did, Diana still treated him the same as before, which means that all his attempts to change this were useless. Then Hestia could not stand it and said that what is done in the name of love will never be useless. After all, Kale knows how to love, and this is where his happiness lies. And then the heroine promised that she would do everything in her power to make him happy. The girl was about to leave when Kale first wanted to say something to her, but then changed his mind. Then Hestia decided that since they wanted to tell her something, then the next day the dialogue should be continued. But the Marquise's plans were not destined to come true because she had a lot to do, including learning land management and lessons from Madame Harmony. While the girl was lying and thinking about all her affairs, she suddenly remembered that she had forgotten something important, namely, choosing a dress for a tea party. And since all the tailors were already busy because of the tea party, Hestia decided that she would alter the dress for herself. After all, everyone at the tea party will look at the heroine's appearance, so she needs to look good. And in the end, Madame supported her in this endeavor. Harmony also offered Hestia a tailor named Decamar, who, although he looked intimidating, was good at his job. But the problem is that Decamar is from ordinary people, which confuses many. But it didn't matter to Hestia because the main thing is skills. The heroine showed the tailor the dress she wanted to alter and then some jewelry that might also come in handy. And after that, Decamar began to bombard the girl with questions about what she liked about dresses. But the heroine simply said that the tailor should decide everything himself. The main thing is that it looks good on her. And then Decamar suddenly began to say that he had come up with the perfect sketch and then ran away to sketch it. While talking with Hestia, Harmonia began to say what a great girl she is and how much she has achieved. And then Madame's words struck the heroine because Harmonia noticed that it would be good if the crown prince's wife behaved like Hestia. But even after all the rumors about Diana, Madame continued to trust her. And then the tailor burst in again with the women, saying that he had many ideas for the Marchioness. Decamar was so inspired that he made too many sketches and then asked the heroine to choose the one she liked best. The tailor was very worried whether the Marquise would like anything and was already beginning to think that she was dissatisfied with everything. And all this time, Decamar had his shirt unbuttoned, and when he saw this, he began to worry even more. All the sketches were beautiful, but for Hestia, there seemed to be something missing, because all the dresses looked exactly like dresses for aristocrats. And then the girl saw another design, but the tailor said that it was drawn only to stretch her hands, however. In the end, it was this sketch that the heroine chose. After some time, preparations for the tea party began, and therefore it was noisy in Kale's palace, which he really did not like. Then Uros explained to the Marquis that everyone was fussing because Hestia was going to Her Majesty's tea party, which would take place that day. And then the butler told Kale that the Marchioness had to alter her existing dress due to lack of time, even though she wanted a new one. Then the Marquis said that the heroine should have asked him for help, and he would have solved everything with money. But Hestia said more than once that she did not want to use her husband's property. In the end, the dress was ready, and the girl looked so beautiful in it that you couldn't take your eyes off it. And although everyone was worried about altering the dress, all the worries were in vain. And while Hestia thanked the tailor, the maids were surprised that the dress was made by such a person, because the dress is so elegant, which cannot be said about Decamar's physique. The design of this dress was the simplest of all those presented, and therefore they even tried to dissuade her, thinking that this was not a dress for tea with Her Majesty. But Hestia still insisted, because she wanted an elegant dress to show off herself. And so that the dress did not look too simple, it was decorated with broken mother-of-pearl shells. Although this idea was great, Decamaru had to try very hard to bring it all to life. One could even say that the tailor put his whole soul into creating the dress. Hestia was very grateful to Decamaru and said that next time she would turn to him for help again. And while they were talking, Kale came to them and said that the door was open. This is the first time that the Marquis himself came to his wife, so it scared her because she thought that something had happened. Kale first looked at the dress and noticed that it didn't even look like it had been altered. And then the Marquis gave Hestia a large bag of money and told the girl to give it to the tailor, thanks to which he would then be able to open his own clothing store. As soon as Kale gave the money, he immediately left, simply saying goodbye to the heroine. Hestia is so beautiful, and her lover did not say anything to her about this, but the heroine understands that he is ready to call only Diana beautiful. But suddenly the Marquis turned around and, looking at the girl, said that this dress suits her. However, Hestia decided that he said the compliment as a goodbye, and not because he really meant it. But the Marquise was pleased with this too, so she thanked her lover for coming to cheer her up. In front of Uros, Kale began to make excuses that he just wanted his reputation not to be ruined, and therefore went to Hestia to look at the dress, and nothing more. At the tea party, the Marchioness met Countess Erinys, who noticed that Hestia was in a good mood, and the Countess herself was in anticipation. As Erinys promised, she was going to become a loyal ally for the heroine, although she is not sure if this is right. The event itself took place in the main palace of the Emperor, because Helios listened to the girl's advice so that at least someone would be with the Emperor at all times. Then the wife of the Crown Prince of the Empire, Diana, appeared, captivating all eyes. And Hestia, at this time, was thinking that there might be a better day to show the true face of the main character of the novel. As it turned out, the heroine was given a place at the same table with the Crown Prince's wife because of her status as a Marchioness. Everyone was very friendly and flattering towards Diana, which Hestia really didn't like, who heard all these compliments towards the Crown Prince's wife, and the heroine understands that it will be difficult to catch the time for her speech. At first glance, everyone treated Diana very well and even admired her. Hestia tried in every possible way to make eye contact with the saint, but she failed because Diana constantly turned away. And then sweets were brought to the event, which were prepared by the Crown Prince's wife herself. From Diana's point of view, she wanted to convey her message by criticizing the luxury of aristocrats. But in this way, she would never be able to convince anyone. No matter what Diana did, everyone praised her. And it turns out that all her life, the saint walked along a flower path, protected from problems. Suddenly, the Marchioness noticed that all this was done by the Crown Prince's wife in order not to forget her peasant origins. And although for Hestia, these sweets bring back memories, for others, they look rustic. And then the heroine asked if anything had happened to Diana with Madame Merope, because her hand was not felt here, and Madame herself was absent from the event. Then Diana began to make excuses by saying that she just wanted to do everything her own way so that this tea party would not be like all the others. But these words did not convince the others, and in the end, only Hestia supported the crown prince's wife, saying that everyone would definitely understand the deepest meaning that Her Highness put into this action. After this, Diana asked the Marquise to dress more appropriately next time, showing that she could fight back against Hestia's words. The girl didn't know if she could answer Her Highness, or if she should just ignore her remark. But then Berenice came to the aid of the Marchioness, making a double click on the saucer, which was a sign that Hestia could say what she wanted, and the Countess would pick it up in the right place. Then the heroine began to say that there was a misunderstanding, because this dress was altered from one of her favorite outfits, and it shines due to the covering with shells, not precious stones. And although everyone was taken by surprise by the fact that this dress had been altered, its beauty overshadowed this fact. And in the end, other girls began to tell Hestia that they could not take their eyes off her. This dress was so amazing. Everyone was especially struck by the shells on the outfit, and so everyone began to ask the heroine who her tailor was. And then Hestia admitted that the tailor who created this dress was a commoner. At that moment, Berenice noticed that if she had not been told, she would never have thought that this masterpiece dress was created by a commoner. And after that, the Countess added that she would also like to entrust this tailor to make a dress for her. And after the Countess's words, everyone supported the idea of altering the dresses, and this puzzled Diana because a lot of money was spent on her dress. If the Crown Prince's wife was going to serve simple treats, then she should have done it in an aristocratic style, and then this idea would have been successful. But Diana made a mistake in this, and therefore no one supported her. And then the Countess asked Hestia why it was necessary to alter a commoner's outfit if she was a marquise and could create a beautiful, expensive dress for herself. And then Berenice clarified whether Marquis Caelis allocates a generous budget to his wife or not. Hestia did not expect this from the Countess, and therefore fell silent for a second, pondering the question. As it turned out, the heroine's surprise was feigned, because before the event, the girl agreed with the Countess that the dialogue should naturally move on to talking about Cael. Hestia began to say that as a spouse, the Marquis respects her completely, and during these words, she carefully watched Diana's reaction. When the girl said that she respected her husband, Berenice recalled how the Crown Prince openly criticized the Marquis's coldness. This was due to one incident where Cael wanted to help the main characters by poisoning Duke Orcus and his daughter, and therefore the Marchioness does not believe that her beloved did wrong. And then Hestia asked Diana what she thought, and whether she thought that Cael had done something wrong. But what is also important is the fact that the Marquis committed this crime not only because of dear people, but also because the Dukes of Orcus were a family that committed any shameless actions, such as selling children into slavery and killing everyone who stood up to them ways. Cael did everything himself because he forbade Helios to help him so that he would not set up the royal family. The Marchioness explained to Her Majesty that the Orcus family was dangerous for the throne because they could start a rebellion, and so the civil war was stopped. To which Diana replied that the end does not justify the means, and in any case, Caelus committed a bad act that violates the laws of the empire. And then Hestia asked why her husband was not punished, since he committed such a terrible crime. As a result, the saint found herself in a difficult situation, because there is no correct answer to the question that was asked to her. And then Countess Berenice stood up for Diana, saying that she was not obliged to answer anything to the question posed, because this could disturb His Majesty. Then Hestia apologized if she had offended her, and then said that she hoped she would be generously spared. Countess Diana's protection was also part of Hestia and Berenice's plan. So with joyful thoughts, the heroine said that she would go out to clear her head. When the Marquise left, she was finally able to relax, because she would return back just in time for the end of the tea party. And then the crown prince approached Hestia while she was resting and breathing fresh air, which came as a surprise to the girl. The Marquise began to think about why Helios approached her, because there must be some reason for this. The heroine was in such confusion that she did not even greet the crown prince, to which he made a remark. Afterwards, Helios asked why the Marquise was sitting here alone while Diana's tea party was still going on. He asked if anything had happened between the girls, guessing that the heroines did not treat each other very well. And then Hestia asked the crown prince a response question about what he was also doing in this place alone. As it turned out, the prince was heading to a tea party, and when it was the girl's turn to answer the question, she explained that she had shown disrespect for Her Majesty and therefore decided to clear her head. Then Helios began to worry, asking what the Marquise had said to offend Diana, to which Hestia replied that she simply wanted to restore her husband's honor. At first, the crown prince thought that the Marchioness was using Chaol to fight Diana, but the girl made it clear that she was doing all this only because she loved her husband. A few hours earlier, when Hestia went to a tea party, a letter arrived at the Marquise's house asking a man to visit the imperial palace to discuss the rights to Ilion. Chaol understood that he would have to go to the palace, but as soon as he thought that he might meet Diana again, he felt bad. As a result, the Marquis decided to go to the Emperor on a day when he would definitely not meet Her Majesty, because she would be at a tea party. On this day, after a long time, Chaos was able to meet Emperor Arius and was able to talk with him. As it turned out, the hero was called to the palace not to discuss issues, but to tell him about his wife. And then the Marquis told the Emperor that although his wife was reckless, the man knew for sure that she sincerely cared about him. His Majesty noticed that this girl definitely loved the Marquise very much, which surprised the hero because it was difficult for him to imagine that someone who was unfamiliar with him could fall in love with him. Therefore, Chaol still does not understand what exactly pushes Hestia to do the things she does for the sake of her husband. And when the Marquis was returning, he unexpectedly saw his wife, who, instead of being at the tea party, was communicating with Helios. Just at that moment, the heroine told the crown prince that she loved her husband. But His Majesty does not believe in this because before the wedding, the Marca and the girl were even strangers. And then he asked Hestia to explain why she loves Chaol so much. The girl seemed to have been preparing for this question for a very long time, answering it very thoroughly, fully describing everything that she likes and admires about Chaol. The prince had already begun to try to stop Hestia, but the heroine did not want to stop, saying that she had not told everything yet. And all these words were heard by the one about whom they were, and then the Marquis began to think that maybe the girl really loved him. Afterwards, the heroine and Helios went to a tea party, and even then she could not say anything to Diana, because her husband was nearby, so the remaining time passed well for the saint. As a result, Hestia decided that she would ask Erinys to find out public opinion about Diana. The heroine was already thinking that she would soon be home, when suddenly she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw her lover. Then the girl immediately ran to the Marquis, asking him if everything was fine and what he was doing here, to which the man replied that he simply had business with the Emperor, and therefore he decided to wait for the heroine so that they could go home together. And at the very end of his words, Chaol affectionately addressed the girl, calling her Hessie, which is why the girl's heart seemed to almost explode. But although Hestia was very happy, she still did not understand why Chaol suddenly turned to her kindly and waited to ride together. And then the Marquise also realized that she had not said a word to her husband about where she would be and where to wait for her. When the couple arrived, Chaol wanted to help Hestia get out of the carriage, giving her his hand, and called her affectionately again. As a result, the heroine dared and still offered her hand to her lover, thanking him for his help. After this, the heroine was so happy that she no longer even remembers what she was doing when she arrived and how she ended up in her room. As a result, the heroine immediately went to bed, leaving all matters for later, even her diary, which she wanted to put in order and make new plans. And while Hestia fell asleep with happy thoughts, Diana, meanwhile, was worried that she was indeed wrong, still thinking about what happened at the tea party. Diana thought about why Kale really wasn't punished, and then added that she couldn't say anything in response to the Marquise. And after all this, the Crown Prince asked his wife that maybe they should make peace with Kale, because they used to be best friends. However, Diana was not going to forgive Kale. Although the main characters were indebted to the Marquis, she did not want to give up her beliefs. And Her Majesty eventually just started crying, and her husband immediately rushed to calm her down and apologize for bringing up this topic. The next day, Uros brought Hestia 2 letters, one of which was from Madame Harmonia, and the other from His Highness the Crown Prince. Although the letter from Madame was expected, the letter from Helios turned out to be a real surprise, because he had no reason to write to the heroine yet. The letter from His Majesty said that he had heard about everything that the Marchioness did to Diana at the tea party, so Hestia would have to come and apologize to the princess. Of course, Hestia was not pleased with the prince's order to apologize to Diana. The heroine even crumpled the letter because of how angry she was. And although, thanks to Helios, the tea party ended on a good note, rumors still spread that the Crown Prince's wife still despised the aristocracy, and that is why she arranged such a simple reception. The girls' plans did not include the Crown Prince intervening in Hestia's attempts to turn public opinion away from Diana. At first, the Marquise simply ignores them all, but she realizes that then she might actually be arrested for insulting the imperial family. Then Hestia decided to get an audience with Diana first, thinking about how tired she was because of so many things to do. The butler, seeing how the Marquise's mood had deteriorated because of the letter, decided to distract her and cheer her up with all sorts of little things, such as tea or coffee. And while Uros ran for a cup of tea, Hestia decided to read the letter from Madame, and what was written in it made the heroine dumbfounded. Meanwhile, the maid took the tray from the butler with the words that this was part of her duties, so she herself would bring the tray for the Marquise. The argument between the servants was useless, because Hestia urgently ran somewhere and there could be no talk of any tea. And Hestia ran, as it turned out, to the Marquis to tell him very important news. And meanwhile, the Marquis was painting a picture, not expecting anyone. The reason for the heroine's haste was that she learned the news that the temple had begun to openly criticize the Marquis over the land, saying that Hestia was too blinded by profit and ignored humanity. Even if the nobles rebel against Diana, the Prince of the Empire and the temple will tightly guard her behind her. Hestia began to think about what she had against the temple, and then remembered that, initially, the most important role of the temple in this novel was to heal people, because only the aristocracy had doctors. And then the heroine realized that people would stop visiting the temple only if they stopped getting sick, and personal hygiene could help them with this. In order to share this idea, the Marchioness ran to her husband, explaining to him that if people start washing their hands with soap, which was intended only for the nobility, then they would get sick much less often. And if you start making soap without essential oils or fine threads, then it can be sold at a low price to the common people. It turns out that Hestia suggested that Kale open a soap factory so that as few people as possible would go to the temple, after which his position would begin to weaken. But as it turned out, the heroine decided to sort it all out herself, without involving her beloved in this. But since she is a Marchioness, she came to receive permission to act on behalf of Kale. And then the girl added that she also needed startup capital to open a new business, but she didn't have enough money for that. And then the Marquis explained to Hestia that this would not be needed because there was a working workshop in Ilion. And then, if the girl wishes, she and Kylus could go to the domain together. It came as a surprise to Hestia that her lover invited her to go on a trip with him. Kale noticed how this proposal delighted and excited the heroine, who did not even immediately believe that this was happening in reality. But due to the fact that the Marquise did not give an answer to the proposal for a long time, Her husband thought that she simply did not want to, but Hestia immediately disputed Kale's thoughts, explaining her uncertainty by saying that she simply did not want to interrupt her beloved's rest. It turned out that there were rumors among the others that the Marquis was ill, and therefore his wife did everything for him. So in any case, he had to appear somewhere. After these words, Hestia decided that it was because she had poorly managed the estate. But her husband convinced her when he praised the heroine, because all the residents were very grateful, and Kale himself was grateful too. The Marquis thought that the heroine reminded him of his past, when he was ready to do anything for love. So he decided to respond to her efforts by offering to go this week. But there is an obstacle in the heroine's path in the form of Diana, who is waiting for an apology, and although Hestia would happily choose the trip, she could then get into trouble. And then the heroine decided that she needed to ask for forgiveness as quickly as possible, so that she could then calmly travel with her beloved. Diana greeted Hestia with the words that she did not even expect an apology from the Marchioness, so she was surprised at how quickly the girl requested an audience. But no matter what Her Majesty said, it was clear that she still expected what was happening now. As a result, the Marquise quickly asked for forgiveness and said that it was time for her to go because she was in a hurry to go on a trip. But the princess stopped the girl with the words that she had recently prophesied for Helios that his majesty would soon die, and then asked if the heroine had seen anything else about this. This question was asked because last night, His Majesty suddenly felt dizzy and fainted, but the saint was nearby and used her healing powers. And then Hestia suddenly asked Her Majesty if she had problems with her superpower, to which Diana reacted very clearly, repeating that she had no problems. After this, the Marquis said that she had a vision that Diana's powers were becoming weaker and weaker, and soon they would completely disappear without a trace. The saint began to argue with Hestia, saying that this ability was given to her by God, so that the Marquise did not even understand what she was talking about. But the heroine explained to Her Majesty that she was simply conveying what she saw and did not embellish anything, because her strength was also given to her by God. Hestia told Diana that she did not even know how to convey this information to the Crown Prince. But Her Majesty began to say that she would tell everything herself, so let the Marchioness keep it a secret for now. Then the heroine reassured the princess that if she did not want to, then Hestia would not convey this prediction to Helios. As a result, the girl gave sacred advice on how to keep her secret longer, and then left with thoughts about how the couple of main characters would survive this crisis. Diana believed that she was special because she had been told so all her life, so she had no doubt that God would not abandon her. And the next day after that, as planned, Kale and Hestia went on a trip. But they went for a reason, but to look at the land of Ilion, which is an important place of events of past years, where the Marquis fell in love with the saint again, over and over again. Therefore, Hestia was very worried, because they were going to a place full of memories of Diana, which could cause pain to the heroine's loved one. Kale thought that the Marquise did not like the place they were going to so much that his wife began to get nervous about it. Ilion has a rich area along a large river with developed trade. This city is full of life, as it is known for its bustling streets and proximity to the capital of the empire. And then Hestia repeated the words Diana had said in the past, that in this place, it felt like people were living and working to the fullest, shocking Kale, who did not understand how his wife knew the words spoken by the princess. That's when the Marchioness realized that she had unknowingly uttered Diana's line from the original story. And then the carriage jerked, and because of this, Hestia's ribbon wrinkled a little, so Kalus immediately tried to straighten the girl's decoration. And then a stone fell under the wheel of the carriage again, so the heroes were shaken a little again, and because of this, they found themselves in an awkward position. And while Hestia was embarrassed by the distance Kale was now from her, the man, meanwhile, decided to continue asking questions about the girl's strength, because it turns out that she can foresee such little things as ordinary dialogue. The Marquis guessed that the heroine had already seen that he was in this city with Diana. The heroes went to a place that Kale called a place for entertainment, where you can do whatever you want, and then added that more than 20 people could come there and were ready to start working. The girl was glad that there was such a good place on their property, next to which transport was developed, and there was a large enough warehouse for storing materials. And then the Marquis asked his wife if she had gathered all the soap makers. However, they all expressed disapproval, because for them, soap is a work of art, and it is unpleasant for them to make a lot of soap at a time. Even Decamar helped the heroine in searching for artisans, but even he could not find anyone, so Kale will have to join the search. However, Hestia began to try to persuade Marquis not to help her, because he might overdo it, but he noted that he should help her, because he is her husband. But then, the spouse's dialogue was interrupted to provide information that a visitor had come to the workshop. As it turned out, this visitor was the headman of Ilion, who was worried that the heroes had not arrived and something had happened because they did not arrive at the residence where they were expected. Kale noticed that the girl was more friendly with the head of the city and not with him, her husband. After this, the headman asked why they went to the workshop, and the Marquis explained that it was so that his wife could see the place that she was going to use. Since the heroine is going to use this workshop, the headman decided to prepare all the equipment that will be needed. All the nights Hestia spent without sleep were not in vain, because the heroine took good care of the affairs of the estate, and thanks to her, the embankment is now perfectly restored. After all, the embankment was destroyed by a flood, after which the main characters fell in love with each other, but fortunately, Ilion suffered minor losses. The conversation was followed by a discussion of issues, and Kale was given the opportunity to review the construction log and accounting records. It was an unexpected fact for the Marquis that his wife dealt with all the matters herself, so he also gave her the report to read. The young man noticed how hard Hestia works and how diligently she learns new things. After reading the report, the Marquis gave a number of instructions related to the embankment to the mayor of the city. And then the heroine was offered to look at the embankment itself, for which the girl worked so much. Hestia refused this proposal because she was afraid that for the Marquis, this place was full of bad memories. But the man himself agreed to this walk. The hero explained his desire by saying that since this is the result of Hestia's efforts, then it is necessary to examine it. And besides, this place has always been very picturesque. And another reason was that Kale wanted to appear with the girl like the married couple that they were. Therefore, Kale extended his hand to his wife with the words that they should go together, because he wants it. At this moment, the heroine admitted that being reborn in the body of Hestia was a real dream for her, especially on this day, which she spends with her beloved. For Hestia, it seemed like a real dream, because she walked arm in arm with Kale, while the others kept their distance from them. The heroine understood that this place was full of memories for her husband, and all she could do for him now was wait, walking in step with the slow step of the Marquis. And then the young man clarified that Hessie probably already knows that he was walking here with Diana, because you can't hide anything from the heroine. And then Hestia made it known that since she knew everything, her husband might not pretend around her that everything was fine. As the heroine expected, all of Kale's thoughts at the moment were occupied by memories of walks with Diana, who was such a good person for the man that she illuminated everything around him. But in the end, the Marquis noticed that the girl was uncomfortable with these conversations, but she reassured him because thanks to the saint, Kale was able to experience the precious experience of love. But in her heart, Hestia hated the princess because she was always sure that she was right, but her path was not always the right one. Diana always looks at life simply, so the girl suggested that Kale also try to live a simple life. And then the Marquise noticed that her beloved was laughing at her, which greatly embarrassed the heroine. Due to the girl's energy, her hair began to be a mess, so the young man approached her and slightly straightened it. And then he admitted to Hestia that he was grateful to her for a lot of things. So the man thanked her for everything that the girl had done for him. Having said his words of gratitude, the Marquis began to approach Hestia closer and closer, causing her to blush from head to toe. It turned out that Kale was coming so close in order to finally straighten his wife's hair and then tie the ribbon so that the wind would no longer bother her. But the girl was also surprised by the fact that the Marquis used Hestia's hairpin, which she left with Kale, which means that he kept it all this time. The girl felt ashamed that when her beloved began to approach, she did not think at all that he was going to fix her hair. Meanwhile, the Marquis himself noticed that the renovated embankment looks solid. And all this is thanks to the fact that the heroine gave the correctly approved budget on time. Hestia was pleased that her husband noticed all her efforts because she does all this only for his sake. Kale has no idea how many times he has to say thank you to his wife because she has done so much for him. The girl listened to the Marquis as if not believing her ears because she was very pleased with the man's words. And then the heroine realized that she could not leave the novel only because the meaning of Hestia's presence in it lies in her beloved Kale, whom she helps in every possible way. And while the girl was thinking about the meaning of existence, the Marquis suggested that she should return home. The Marquise understands that it is she who should thank her husband and not vice versa because he brought meaning to her life. With such thoughts, the girl followed her beloved, who made her very happy. Hestia understood that for her, the main character of this novel was only Kaielus, and all the others were just meaningless text. And a few days later, the Marquis was asked about this trip, because most likely rumors that Kaielus and his wife went to Ilion had already spread. But for Hestia, this question came as a surprise, and so she asked how Madame knew about this. And then the girl found out that in high circles, everyone only talks about their spouses. The Marquise was surprised at how quickly rumors spread, even though the trip had only recently taken place. At that moment, the girl realized that Madame was very curious about the story about her date with Kale, so she started talking about it. Hestia had to explain to Madame Harmonia that the heroine and her husband did not go on a date, but just to look at the workshop, and along the way, they also examined their property. Then, Madame remembered that Decamar was looking for soap makers for the Marquise, because the girl plans to open a soap factory of her own production. But the problem is that all the craftsmen are stubborn, and it is difficult to convince them to work on mass production. This fact greatly upset Hestia, because without skilled workers, her plan could not become a reality, remaining only a pipe dream. Madame Harmony felt sorry for the girl, and she immediately offered her help in finding workers. But the Marquise refused, explaining that everything was fine and she no longer needed help. And all because Kale had already taken up helping the heroine, and, as if by magic, 2 artisans were quickly found who decided to bring their students. And besides, when the method of mass production of soap is fully established, it will be better to hire slum dwellers and pay them an allowance. Everything will go swimmingly in the workshop when the artisans and apprentices finish developing the technology, and the poor souls can then get a job. Madame Harmony was amazed at how easily the Marquis himself solved such a problem. Kale must value his wife very much, since he helped her so much, and even went with her to Ilion. The soap factory is doing well at the moment, and it's all thanks to Marquis. Despite all the noise that Hestia made at Diana's tea party, Harmonia, who was very close to the saint, sent the heroine a letter with a story about the temple. And while Hestia was all in thought, Madame was happy with how great everything was going with the soap factory. It occurred to the Marquise that the relationship between Harmony and Her Majesty might somehow change, so she decided to find out at all costs. Afterwards, the heroine thanked Madame for the letter warning about the condemnation of the temple, and then apologized for not sending a response because she was very busy. The girl asked if Harmony had anything happened during this time, while they were not communicating, that the Marquise did not know about. As it turned out, the reason for Madame's desire to meet with Hestia was the crown prince's wife. Then the girl asked what happened to Diana since Harmony came to her. Madame admitted that she wouldn't tell anyone else this except the Marquise, but Her Highness is still not used to living in the imperial family, and Diana's very straightforward character interferes with this. It was very unexpected to hear these words from Harmony, who had always been on the side of the saint, protecting her in every possible way. So something really bad had to happen. And the reason for Madame's words was that there were rumors about Madame Merop's decision to leave the imperial palace. She, who was practically the guardian of the imperial palace, decided to leave her home, which turned out to be a shock for Hestia. And although the emperor and crown prince immediately stopped Merope, her intentions remained as firm. Therefore, Madame Harmony began to think that all this was happening precisely because of Diana. The Marquise agreed, remembering that at Diana's tea party, Madame Merop's hand was not felt, so perhaps she and the princess had quarreled. Madame Harmony thought so too, because all this could not just be an ordinary coincidence. Merope must have decided that she could no longer handle Her Majesty, and due to her advanced age, she might also be mentally exhausted. Although Hestia wanted to ruin Diana's reputation, it turned out that the saint herself dealt with it much better. Her Majesty should be told to balance things more carefully, as the role of Madame is becoming increasingly important. Because of the situation that had happened, Madame Harmony could not find a place for herself, because she was the one who always supported the crown prince's wife in everything. It was noticeable how Madame's attitude towards Her Majesty had changed, which was very unusual for such a kind heroine as Harmony. Even one of those who had always been kind to the saint began to question her actions, which was one of Hestia's small victories. And because of this behavior of Her Majesty, Madame Harmony had a request to the Marquise. Madame Harmonia herself abandoned Diana and asks Hestia for a favor, and therefore what was happening was surprising for the girl. Hestia was already imagining how Madame would ask her for something similar to a request for help in leaving the crown prince's wife, or something similar. But the heroine's dreams did not come true, because instead of abandoning the saint, Madame asked Hestia to talk directly to Diana. The girl was already beginning to think that it was just her imagination, because she was expecting something completely different. Hestia even had to ask again whether she would definitely need to do this, and whether it would be precisely with the crown prince's wife, Her Majesty Diana. Madame's request was that the Marquise simply talk to the saint, which did not fit into the heroine's recent thoughts at all. However, Hestia recalled that Her Highness turned away from her because of an incident at a tea party, because during it, the princess was very offended by the heroine. But Madame began to convince the Marquise that one mistake did not mean that Kael's wife could no longer take care of the saint. After all, according to Madame, the girl alone can influence Her Majesty, and even the only one who dares to talk to Diana directly. This information was so unexpected for Hestia that it took her a minute to understand and think about it. Madame understands that such a sudden request caused difficulties for the Marquise, because it was all too unexpected. But Harmony could no longer remain silent, because lately Her Highness has become somehow sharper, and what used to pass calmly, now Diana perceives it sharply and emotionally. Madame herself also tried to talk to Her Majesty, but the girl, without listening to anything, simply left. Diana cannot continue in the same spirit, because at this rate, the saint will quickly lose her authority. Therefore, the person who the crown prince's wife needs most now is Hestia, because it is she, in Madame's opinion, who has earned the trust of Her Highness. The Marquise herself decided that Madame Harmony had gone crazy to say such implausible things. Meanwhile, Madame continued to look with hope at the girl, who did not understand why she should say something to Her Majesty. Most likely, Harmonia developed such faith in Hestia precisely after the tea party, because then the heroine showed that she could say whatever she thought in front of Diana, without fear of anything. But, on the other hand, It turns out that Diana's condition is so bad that she doesn't even listen to Madame Harmony. If you think about it this way, then it was the Emperor and Helios who said that they did not allow Madame Merope to leave the palace. This means that it seems that in this case, Diana is not at odds with her husband. Judging by the fact that the crown prince has not yet called Hestia to his place, he does not yet know about what is now happening with the divine power of his wife. Having thought over the whole situation, Marquise began to come up with another brilliant plan on what to do with all this information. And then the heroine told Harmony that she could not resist such a heartfelt request. And then Madame promised that she, too, would help Hestia in return when she needed help. It would be difficult to dare to refuse Madame's request because she gives lessons to Diana, so you need to maintain a good relationship with her. And the best part is that after fulfilling this request, Madame Harmony will be indebted to the Marquise. But Hestia's only thought was that she was not going to help Diana even under the threat of death. And at that time, Madame was thinking about how good the Marquise was. Meanwhile, the crown prince was alone in the lily garden, flying somewhere in the clouds. It turned out that Helios still could not believe that Merope, who had been with the young man since childhood, was really leaving after so many years. Madame Merope took the place of the early departed Mother Empress and took care of Helios until he grew up. Merope was not just a servant, but a full member of the family for the crown prince. That's why Helios burst into Madame's room asking if she was really leaving. And the crown prince found the maid of the imperial palace collecting all her things, which she put into suitcases. Then Merope said that she prayed to God every day that His Highness would become a merciful ruler, and therefore God would take care of the crown prince without Madame. Helios asked Madame Merope if Diana was to blame for her sudden departure. In response to this, Madame replied that she was simply tired of what she was missing. His Majesty noticed how faithful a person Merope was because she did not advertise that it was his wife who was the reason for Madame's departure. Old-fashioned ladies have always been a breeding ground for Diana's authoritarianism and luxury, so the heroine always argued with Merope. That is why Her Majesty organized that tea party as an occasion to declare her beliefs. However, since Diana is the first member of the imperial family to entertain influential nobles, and Merope in no case could allow her dignity to be insulted. The crown prince understands that everyone already knows that it was Diana who caused Madame to leave, even though Merope didn't say anything about it. Like Harmony, Helios began to notice changes in his wife because she even stopped caring for the garden in which he was currently walking. Although Her Majesty used to devote a lot of time to this, due to the fact that when she sees beautiful flowers, she feels peaceful. In those days, the saint told Helios that he was very often worried, so it would be good if he too became calmer from the sight of flowers. Then the couple was having fun, and Heli asked Diana what to do if he still didn't feel better from the sight of flowers. And when in the crown prince's memory, the saint told him that in this case, she would appear behind his back. In real life, at the same moment, Hestia called out to him. Due to the fact that Helios did not see the face of the one who called him, he at first thought that it was his wife. For a second, His Majesty even thought that he saw his beloved who was calling him. However, it was not Diana at all, but Hestia, who continued to try to shout to the crown prince. The crown prince continued to wander in his thoughts, and the girl even began to worry that something had happened. Meanwhile, Helios continued to think about Diana, who told him that she would console him. And then it finally dawned on the crown prince that the Marquise had been standing in front of him all this time. Hestia was surprised by the reaction with which the prince met her, and the heroine was already beginning to think that she had come in vain. The girls' voices are completely different, and so Helios decided that he was crazy for confusing them. As a result, the crown prince was still able to gather his thoughts and asked what the Marchioness was doing here if she had not come to Diana. And the reason was that although Hestia received a request from Madame Harmony, the heroine did not intend to meet Her Majesty and conduct a dialogue with her. Hestia visited the imperial palace only because she wanted to talk specifically with Helios, although the Marchioness did not expect to meet him in the garden on the way to her office. It was written on the Crown Prince's face that something had happened, and then the heroine realized that it was either because of Madame Merope or because of the health of the Emperor. It was fortunate for the Crown Prince that he met with Hestia because he wanted to ask the heroine a question. And then the Marquise thought that this was due to the problems of Her Majesty's holy power. But contrary to expectations, the Crown Prince asked if it was true that Kale had finally gotten out to inspect his possessions. And when the Marquise said that she and her husband then decided to go together, Helios was glad that his friend's condition had improved. But Hestia dispelled the Crown Prince's dreams, saying that a doctor accompanied them on this trip, which means things were still not so good. The heroine was outraged by the fact that while Helios was having fun with Diana, he did not care about Kale's condition. And when His Majesty found himself alone, he immediately decided to show his participation. But after meeting with the Crown Prince, it became clear that the saint kept her secret and did not share it with her husband. And then Hestia began to wonder how long Her Majesty would keep the prediction about her powers a secret. And although the heroine was thinking about something completely different, she thanked Helios for being so worried about her husband. And then she added that today, the Crown Prince does not look the same as usual because he looks upset and tired. But this is understandable because Helios is probably very worried about His Majesty the Emperor and his well-being. And when the prince asked what the girl was talking about, she explained that his wife told her everything about what happened to the Emperor. And although Her Highness immediately managed to use her holy power, her husband still looks pale and anxious. Hestia was the first to know what was going to happen, so there was no point in hiding anything from her. Then Helios said that although his father had received Diana's divine power, at the moment it was still difficult for him to move, which means that His Majesty had not yet fully recovered. The heroine said that she knew that it would be so, which greatly surprised the Crown Prince, because he did not understand what she meant by saying that she knew it. Pretending to be surprised, the Marchioness asked His Majesty whether his wife really hadn't told him something. But Helios only clarified what his wife had to do with it. And then the heroine again added fuel to the fire, saying that, judging by the man's words, his wife had not told him anything yet. If so, then Hestia's prediction came true, and the girl said that with this, she would no longer bother His Majesty. Following this, the Marquise heard only Helios's question about how she dared to abandon her duty to the Crown Prince. Finally, the heroine added only that sooner or later, Her Highness will reveal herself to her husband. Hestia admitted to the prince that she was worried that Diana did not say about such an important event, and was also silent about the problems that the saint had with Madame Merope. And it was not clear who the most authoritative person in the palace was, since even though the Emperor and his son persuaded Madame to stay, she still left because of Her Majesty. His Majesty ordered the Marchioness to stop saying such things because he would no longer tolerate this nonsense. And then Hestia said that Helios had made too many mistakes, and therefore she was very sorry. The Marquise would not have thrown around words so easily, so the Crown Prince began to wonder what Diana had to say to him. It was not clear from the saint's behavior that she was hiding something, because she behaved as usual and always greeted her husband with a smile. Her Majesty was about to pour her lover the tea that she had brewed, but Helios stopped her because he came to her with a request. And the request was that Diana would also heal the Emperor with her power, because he had not yet fully recovered. It would seem that such a simple action for a saint, because you just need to heal a person, but it was clear how much she began to worry about this. But the girl was quickly able to put on a mask of calm, saying that Helios scared the girl with his tone. And then the saint promised that she would definitely visit her husband's father again at noon in order to help him with the help of her power. The Crown Prince apologized to his wife for distracting her because she might still have a lot to do, but Diana reassured him because she herself wanted to do the same. However, the man wondered if this was too much since his wife already uses her holy power on His Majesty morning and evening. And then Diana said that if she had lost her power, then she would have had to worry, but everything was fine, and the crown prince should not doubt the power of God. Her Majesty gave her word that the emperor will recover soon, so there is no need to worry about anything. Helios wanted to say something else to his wife, but could not, because he was interrupted by an unexpected knock on the door. A maid interrupted the couple's conversation to inform them that the high priests were waiting in the living room. And then Diana went to a meeting with them, which was scheduled for that time, so the girl was unable to continue the dialogue with her husband. While the maid was escorting Her Majesty to the high priests, she noticed that the princess was in a hurry, as if she was being pursued. And the explanation for Diana's haste was that she was very frightened by the dialogue about her powers, and therefore she tried to run away as quickly as possible. The saint began to worry that Hestia could already tell everything to her husband, who spoke as if he knew something. For a second, Her Majesty had the thought of returning and talking honestly about everything with Helios, but then she decided that it was not the time yet. While the girl was thinking about the whole situation, the servant noticed that something was wrong with the main character and tried to understand what happened. But Diana's thoughts were completely occupied with the fact that even though her powers had not completely disappeared yet, when this happened, it would no longer be possible to hide the secret. Not only the princess was pondering the situation at that moment, but also her husband, whom she left alone with his thoughts. The man did not understand how it happened that those he trusted were leaving. The emperor's health was deteriorating, and his beloved wife had become suspicious. At first, the thought occurred to him that this was all happening because of Hestia, but he quickly drove it away from himself, because it was his problem that he could not complete his affairs. The crown prince is not used to getting out of problems on his own, because before he always had Kale with him, who helped him in everything. And then His Majesty decided that he urgently needed to meet with the Marquis, because it was he who always found a way out of difficult situations. Hestia, meanwhile, was happy that after the tea party, Countess Erinys finally called the heroine to her place, and she also wrote that she was grateful to the Marchioness for the Countess's friendship with Diana. But Erinys' pride was hurt by the fact that Her Highness does not open her heart so easily to the usual flattering words or gifts, and because of this, the Countess learned the news about Madame Merope later than Harmony. The Marchioness understood that Countess Erinys was not a friend to her, but a political ally. The Countess asked the heroine for advice, and she suggested that first of all, look at Diana's environment and also try to change it. And then Hestia remembered the crown prince, surprised that there was no news from him, which means that the main characters could have already settled all the problems. But even in this case, the Marquis should have been called to the palace. As soon as the girl thought about His Majesty, she met him along with her beloved, which she did not expect. Thus, the Marquise found herself in a quiet mansion in the imperial capital, which was the secret villa of the prince featured in the original work. For the novel, this was a historical place where the relationships between the characters began to develop seriously as soon as Helios told Diana about this place. Hestia doesn't understand why she ended up in this particular villa, and even with the two most important, handsome men in the novel. The crown prince told Kale that they should go away to talk, and after the Marquise's words that if something happened to her husband, he should immediately call the girl, he was very surprised that he was considered so dangerous. But Hestia had a reason for her excitement, because the last time Helios was alone with the Marquis, Kale got hurt. As it turned out, the girl ended up in that place because the crown prince wanted to meet somewhere, and since this is an official order from His Majesty to the Marquis, the man cannot simply ignore it. Hestia was outraged that the crown prince ordered her husband to meet, because he was afraid that Kale would refuse a regular meeting. And since the heroine recently met with Helios, then perhaps she knows why he wanted to meet. And then the heroine explained that the prince was in a state of moral exhaustion. The heroine was angry with His Majesty because when Kale was having a hard time, Helios didn't even flash. And when he himself had problems, he immediately wanted to see him. But Hestia was angry so cutely that Kale, on the contrary, began to calm down because of this. Hestia was not going to let her beloved go alone, so she expressed a desire to go with him. Although the heroine was glad that the meeting was not taking place in the palace, she was still angered by the fact that the prince chose this particular place, even though he has money for other secret places. The girl's excitement was so obvious that even Dr. Marquise Macarius noticed it and began to reassure Hestia that Kale should definitely be fine. And although the conversation between His Majesty and the Marquis drags on, it means that Hestia's husband began to feel much better. The doctor noted that if the Marquise continues in the same spirit, then it will no longer be her husband who will have to be treated, but the heroine herself. As soon as Kale's wife began to think that her lover was really staying too long, he immediately left. But he returned, unfortunately, not in the best condition, because he was very pale and could barely stand on his feet. Meanwhile, the crown prince simply left without even saying goodbye to the one whom he previously considered his best friend. The doctor immediately offered the man medications that would help relieve tension, but Kale pushed the hand with the pills away from him. And while the heroine wondered what happened to her beloved, he clarified whether Hestia really demanded from Helios the land of Attica, the possession of Duke Orcus. It turned out that Helios told the Marquis that the girl demanded these lands and the title of Duke for Kale in exchange for her prediction. Hestia understands that her husband is now confused because she did not tell the Marquis such important information. Kale directly asked his wife if she wanted the title of Duchess, and if not, if she was related to Duchess Ratona. A few hours earlier, the Crown Prince and the Marquis had a dialogue, during which Helios apologized for calling his friend to the meeting by order because he was simply afraid that they would not want to see him. Then Kale asked what business he was called on, calling Helios Mr. Crown Prince, which surprised His Majesty with its formality. And since even the Marquis has already moved so far away from the main character, the man has no one else to trust. And then Kale said that trusting someone is, in fact, a decision that a person makes by the power of his will. And then His Majesty the Crown Prince wondered if he could now trust Diana, who was acting as if she was hiding something. And since Helios has no more questions for Kale, the Marquis hastened to leave the prince because his wife is waiting for him. The Crown Prince then noticed that his friend seemed to really trust Hestia, even knowing what the girl asked for in exchange for the prediction. As soon as His Majesty learned that the Marchioness had not informed her husband about this, he said that the heroine asked to make Kale a duke, the owner of the land of Attica, where the late Duke Orcus ruled. This information did not fit in Kale's head because Hestia did not seem greedy to him, and he was sure that she did not need wealth because she herself often repeated that she was not interested in property and finance. Kale decided that he should not have trusted his wife because she could simply deceive him, and that's why he went to the heroine very upset. Then the Marquise began to worry that she had brought her loved one to such a state, and she began to panic so much that the doctor decided to leave the couple alone. Hestia decided to resolve this misunderstanding as soon as possible, so she began to explain that she had no connections with the late Duchess, and she was doing all this so that the prince and his wife would apologize to her husband. The territory of Attica and the duchy are needed only for the implementation of her plan, and the girl has no hidden goals. Kale asked on what basis he should trust someone who had already hidden important information from him. Without an oath, anyone could say such words, so Hestia decided that she could swear that her lover would believe her. Then, the Marchioness began to tell Kale that she wanted him to become an indispensable support in this empire, so that his life would become great, because the country would not get back on its feet without her husband. The heroine also wants the main couple to bow their heads before the Marquis, and she will arrange everything for this. The Marquis's reaction to his wife's vow was that he simply pulled his hand out of her hands and then told them to go home already. Because of her excitement, Hestia remained in place, and Kale began to leave alone, which attracted the attention of the doctor, who noticed that for some reason the Marquis had blushed a little. And then the man wondered if he could trust his wife, and he remembered the words about trust that he himself had recently spoken to the prince. After that day, Kale did not kick Hestia out of his residence, but he did not speak to the girl again. So the heroine lived under the same roof with her beloved, but without seeing him, and then, finally, samples of soap made by artisans arrived. And then Hestia decided to dare to go to her husband to find out his opinion about the soap. But the girl didn't even have time to knock on the door of Kale's office before he opened the door, colliding with the heroine. Then the Marquis asked what Hessie was doing under his door, and she explained everything by saying that she just wanted to take a walk, which did not sound convincing at all. And in the end, the heroine said that samples of soap had arrived, and she wanted to show them to her lover. Kale invited the girl to his office, and then noticed that the soap samples were received quite quickly. Meanwhile, Hestia tried to understand the mood of her husband, noting that he had not gotten worse, and it seemed that he was not even avoiding the heroine. There were several samples of soap, and they were all different, so the heroine asked Kale to choose the best. Among the samples were soaps without fragrance, somewhat hard, slightly soft, and colored, and in the end, the Marquis decided that the soap should be hard and with a fragrance. Until now, soap was the exclusive property of the nobility, and commoners who admire the nobles will surely want something similar. The heroine thanked Kale for the good advice and then said that she would immediately send the answer to the masters. And then the Marquis thought whether the common people would use soap correctly because they had never used it and therefore would not be able to immediately get used to washing with it, so they had to come up with something to help them. After some time, Helena and Pomux appeared at the Marquis's residence, who are excellent actors whose beauty cannot be described in words. But in addition to their appearance, they are comprehensively developed and stage their own plays. People in this novel think that illnesses are God's wrath or punishment. Even if they start using soap, it will not change their worldview. Therefore, Hestia decided to make an advertisement with the help of actors that would convince ordinary people to use soap. Then the Marquise called the most popular actors and explained to them the idea, which was that they could set an example for the people so that all people would start using soap. However, the actors said that they could not accept sponsorship of the heroine with such a condition. And all because the play for Ilion has already been written, staged, and planned. And in such a situation, it is a little unreasonable to add new content at the last moment and revise the script and direction. Hestia realized that she approached the actors too late and then told them that they could respond to this proposal later. The heroine explained her idea to the Marquis because many trends in food or clothing begin precisely because of plays, so the use of soap could become popular thanks to advertising. It was the amount that Kale gave that was offered to the actors in the contract. But Hestia herself was not sure that this amount was appropriate because she knew nothing about the price of advertising in the novel. In addition, in front of the girl, there were actors who currently have the best reputation in the Empire. And as soon as the actors saw the contract with the amount indicated there, they sharply changed their minds and agreed to the advertisement, thanking the Marquise. And while Hestia was thinking that he rated the actors too highly by giving such a sum, and in the meantime, he himself was thinking that it would be worth giving even more. Thanks to the inflated amount, Kelia, Helena, and Pollux enthusiastically promoted the soap, coming up with many phrases that would interest ordinary people. Because of the soap factory, the heroine was faced with even more tasks that took up almost all of her time. So now the girl is very tired every day. Hestia is happy with the fact that at least there are no classes with Madame Harmony and no important social events because the heroine has absolutely no time for that right now. Remembering the social events, the Marchioness thought about how Mrs. Erinys was doing with the persuasion of the young ladies around Diana, and then thought that Helios would soon want to meet the Marchioness. And as the heroine thought, the Crown Prince really called her to him almost immediately after her thoughts that this was about to happen. His Majesty, without even greeting Hestia, told her that he did not trust the girl because of her clashes with Diana and open hostility towards the prince. But despite all the actions of the Marquise, all her predictions were very accurate, and these turned out to be extremely important issues that could decide the fate of the empire. And signing some document, Helios added that the Marquise forced her to admit that the empire needed her abilities. All this led the Crown Prince to ask Hestia to tell him everything that the heroine talked about with Diana, because he was still tormented by the fact that his wife was hiding something from him. And then he added that the girl is obliged to tell him everything, because this is an order from the Crown Prince, and it cannot be disobeyed. Although the heroine made a promise to Her Majesty to keep everything secret, she was ready to break it at any moment. So she began to tell the prince that she had conveyed a promise to his wife. Of course, Hestia emphasized that Diana said that she herself would tell her husband everything and ordered the heroine to remain silent. This is how the prince learned that the Marquise's prediction was that in the next 2 years, Her Highness's healing power would completely disappear. In the original, the source of Diana's healing power was mentioned only once, as if in passing, saying that the saint, who had observed the miserable life of the poor since childhood, fervently prayed to God, and he, in turn, heard her prayers and bestowed strength. There was no reason given in the novel for why Diana was given this power, and most likely it was because she was the main character. And then the Crown Prince realized that the Emperor would not get better, which means that all the words about His Majesty's recovery were a lie. The Marquise asked what Helios plans to do next, to which he replied that he would just wait for now. The Crown Prince told Hestia that the next time she has precognitions, the heroine must first report everything to Helios. The heroine understands that the only thing she can lose in 2 years is her life in the world of the novel, but not her abilities, which never existed. Meanwhile, at Hestia's house, Euros brought her husband a letter that was written to the Marquises from the theater actors sponsored by the hero. And since the Marquise was in the palace at that time, Cale decided to read it himself to find out what happened. In this letter, Helena and Pollux wrote about how grateful they were for the donations, because now they could create plays with an unmatched level of perfection. And in gratitude, the actors left Hestia and Cale 2 tickets for the best seats, because they want the couple to come to their screening of the play, just in case the heroine has freed up time so they can both go to the show together. And after that, for the rest of the day, the heroine's thoughts were only occupied by the fact that she would go somewhere with her loved one. They had even begun to design a dress for her, but Hestia was only worried about the fact that attending a performance together was like a date. As soon as the couple appeared at the theater, they were immediately greeted with joy by Helena and Pollux, thanking them for their time. Decamar even created matching outfits for Hestia and Cale, so going to the show felt even more like a date. And then Helena took the Marquise aside to say that noble people had come to the play, so both the performance and the advertising would have to be a success. Afterwards, the actors wished the couple a pleasant viewing and hurried to the stage. The Marquise realized that she was not here on a date, but on work matters, so she stopped worrying so much, feeling much calmer and more confident. Cale noticed how in a few moments, all the tension suddenly subsided from the girl, and then said that, if you think about it, this is his and Hestia's first event as a married couple. And so the Marquis put his wife's hand on his, and then they went together to watch the play. The heroine was so surprised by this that all her words disappeared, and only emotions remained that she could not hide. Because of the girl's embarrassment, Cale was unable to take his eyes off her, but Hestia herself did not understand why her beloved seemed to be laughing at her. the actors actually included an advertisement in which Helena's character talked about how the soap would make her smell like nobles into their play. In the advertisement, the effect of the soap was slightly exaggerated, to which Kale remarked, but the heroine explained to him that such an advertisement must definitely work. The content of the play turned out to be quite simple, telling about a girl who was a commoner, but was able to deceive everyone and pretend to be a noble lady. As a result, the main character of the play began to live with a false identity in a false world, which reminded Hestia of herself. After all, the Marquise in this world has become a minor fictional character and not herself, and at the moment, there is nothing about her that is not a lie. Hestia felt so sad about her thoughts that even the Marquis noticed her change in mood. The girl understands that she, like the main character of the play, cannot allow her lies to be discovered because all this is being done for the sake of her beloved. In the play, the heroine has a good ending because there is someone who loves her, but if the Marquise's deception is revealed, then she will have no one left in the world of the novel. And when the play ended and people began to leave, they encountered sellers who were shouting about discounts on the soap that the heroine used in the play. Of course, Hestia's plan worked, and everyone immediately rushed to buy this soap because it had such a wonderful aroma, and the product was also very cheap. It was a good idea to sell soap after a successful play because the goods sell better while the impressions of the performance are fresh. If word of mouth works this well, tomorrow everyone will know about soap being sold in department stores. Kale noticed how happy the heroine was and asked her if the play was interesting for her, and then the girl realized that the Marquis himself did not like something in the performance. But the man did not have time to finish his thought before he was interrupted by Helena and Pollux, who were running towards the couple. Helena began to say that this was the best public reaction that the actors received for their plays, and all this was thanks to the Marquises, who supported and sponsored the performance. Helena and Pollux were not the only ones who came up to thank Kale and Hestia, because they followed the actors, and everyone else rushed to thank the Marquises, including for the soap. Due to the large number of people, Hestia began to worry about Kale's condition. But turning around, she saw that he was just standing aside and not worried about anything, because, in his opinion, this is fair due to the fact that he is nothing anyway didn't. And while the heroine listened to all the gratitude in her direction, the Marquis only admired her from afar, thinking about something of his own. Everyone asked Hestia if she was interested in the play, and she answered yes, while her husband, meanwhile, thought that it was all a lie. After all, the hero noticed that his wife did not show any reaction throughout the entire play. During the entire viewing of the performance, Hestia was indifferent to everything, as if it had nothing to do with the girl. It was at this performance that Kale first saw that the heroine had such an expression on her face. The Marquis understands that he has chosen to trust his wife. However, he understands that the girl is still hiding a lot from him. And the man began to think about whether he would wait for the moment when Hestia would trust him and tell him everything herself. After this event, Hestia was very tired because she interacted with a lot of people. The Marquise noticed that her beloved was very lucky because he ran away in advance, because she herself was very exhausted because of the general public who approached her. Kale noticed that the heroine had looked tired all day, and Hestia explained everything by saying that she had been working too much lately, but now she had rested, and it should be better. But even in the cafe, the girl could not completely relax, because at the next table sat aristocrats who were also at the performance and were loudly discussing Pollux. But then the topic of the girls' conversation changed, and they began to talk about how these days His Majesty the Crown Prince often leaves on business. The aristocrats guessed that something must have happened to the emperor, and most likely it was health problems. The girls were very surprised by this, because how is this possible if a saint, the wife of the crown prince, lives in the imperial palace? And although rumors spread very slowly, because quite a lot of time has passed since the emperor's illness, even at this rate, rumors will soon spread that Diana has problems with holy power. And then Hestia heard that there were rumors that the crown prince was a little tired of talking with his wife, which Mrs. Erinys told the aristocrats about. Erinys told everyone that Diana still forces others to live the way she thinks is right. And although this is good news for Hestia that her plan is working, she was also worried that it was hard for Chaol to hear this. But then, the Marquise admitted that the teachings of the temple did not seem as good to him as to the crown prince's wife. These words struck the girl, because Chaol had now given an assessment of Diana, which was also not very flattering, which Hestia did not expect. And then Chaol informed his wife that he must have an audience with His Majesty the Emperor. Then Hestia decided to find out why her beloved needed a meeting with the Emperor, because the girl herself had no idea about the reasons for this unexpected desire. The situation around the couple did not foretell such a recognition from the Marquis, who then added that he had been resting for too long, so it was time for the man to return to work. The girl was against this desire of her wife, because, in her opinion, the hero had not yet fully recovered, so there was no need to return so quickly. Moreover, due to the Emperor's health, the saint would always be by his side. So if Chaol went to His Majesty, then meeting the crown prince's wife would be inevitable. And if the Marquis sees Diana, then because of this, he may become worse again, and his condition has only just begun to improve. Then Chaol reassured his wife that Her Majesty was no one else to him. And then the man added that he did not say that he would go to the Emperor alone, which surprised Hestia, who asked who he was going to go with then. To the surprise of the heroine, Chaol pointed to her, hinting that it was his wife who would go with him to the Emperor. As a result, the couple actually went to an audience with His Majesty, the Emperor, together. The Emperor was glad that Chaol, who was like a son to His Majesty, brought his wife to him. Returning from the cafe, the Marquis immediately requested an audience with the Emperor regarding his return to business. Most likely, His Majesty expected this, so he immediately sent a date for the audience, and the couple ended up going to the palace to meet the Emperor. Chaol greeted His Majesty and then introduced him to his wife, Hestia. Since His Majesty was like a father to the Marquis, Chaol decided that it would be nice to formally introduce his wife to him. The Marquise, meanwhile, was surprised that her husband also came along with Diana, whom the heroine was expecting to see. And although a couple of the main characters fell silent in front of the Emperor, the girl was still worried about their presence. But still, looking at Chaol, Hestia began to think that everything would be fine, because her beloved was getting better, and he was even ready to return to his business. The Emperor was surprised that Hestia became not only the wife of the Marquis, but also his assistant in all matters. His Majesty heard that the Marquise was praised in Ilion, and noted that the girl was a very versatile person. Then the heroine said that these are just rumors that are always exaggerated, and then the Crown Prince added that even if this is an exaggeration, over time it grows stronger and becomes true. Hestia wanted to remain calm, but as soon as Helios said something, she could no longer simply ignore the main characters. Then the Crown Prince noticed that just recently, the Marquis was accompanied everywhere by his attending physician, and now suddenly he wanted to return to business, although the question of whether his condition had improved remained open. And so Helios assumed that it was Hestia who influenced the Marquis, that he suddenly wanted to return. The girl was about to swear when Chaol stopped her to calmly explain that his wife, on the contrary, was against such an early return because she was worried about the condition of her beloved. And although the Marquise tried to stop her husband, he was able to convince her that he was quite healthy. The heroine was struck by these words of Chaol because the man took her side in front of Diana, with whom he had been deeply in love for a long time. Hestia didn't know what emotion she needed to show now in order to look natural and not feigned. And since we were talking about health, Chaol decided to ask how His Majesty the Emperor was feeling at the moment, because the Marquis had heard that he had been unwell lately. The man explained that he initially didn't believe the rumors, but today, the Emperor was so pale that Chaol was really starting to worry. And then the Marquis asked why Diana could not heal his majesty with her divine power. Then the saint began to timidly say something about her ability. But the emperor did not allow her majesty to finish, interrupting her and saying that there was no need to worry. After all, his majesty is getting older with age, and nothing can be done about it. But the emperor, according to him, is much better off than he seems to be. And all these rumors appeared due to the fact that the crown prince is present at the cabinet meeting instead of his father. But this is done so that Helios gains experience. And then Kale replied that it turned out that he had worried in vain, since the emperor was still in good health. And moreover, next to him was a saint with a healing gift. The reason the Marquis insists on mentioning the emperor's health problems and the saint's healing power is because there he warns a couple of the main characters that he knows their secret. Although Diana uses her holy power on the emperor, even so, his majesty's complexion is noticeably bad, which can immediately be said that the emperor is sick. What's surprising is that Kale dared to bring up the topics of the emperor's health and her majesty's strength, which suggested that the Marquis and the crown prince had broken off all relations. And Hestia's husband was simply sending a warning to the main characters. Now, having received a warning, Helios and his wife should think about their further actions, because at the moment, they can either establish friendship with the Marquis couple or call themselves their opponents. Hestia noticed that this moment was ideal for bringing the heroine's next plan to life, so she turned to the emperor with one proposal. When the girl began to speak, the crown prince immediately guessed what the Marquise was getting at, so he tried to stop her, but the attempt remained a failure. And Hestia's proposal was the desire to make her beloved a duke. After the meeting, when the couple was already riding in the carriage, Kale asked his wife how she could even mention the dukedom. The girl explained that she could not trust His Highness the Crown Prince, which is why she turned to the emperor, because there should always be a plan in case of unforeseen circumstances. And then Kale grabbed his head, which made his wife worry, who immediately asked how the Marquis was feeling. The man explained that he was just tired and wanted to sleep, so the heroine suggested that he take a nap while they were driving. And when they got there, she would immediately wake him up. At that moment, when at that meeting the girl started talking about the dukedom, everyone was very surprised because it was unexpected for everyone. But most of all, Diana was shocked, who stated that it was very arrogant for Hestia to demand such a thing. However, the Marchioness did not want to back down. So she explained that, remembering the tyranny of the Orcus family, it was necessary to conclude that it was better to elevate the person most loyal to the emperor, so that what happened to the past dukes would not happen again. Helios at that moment began to try to force the Marquise not to say anything more about this, because, in his opinion, now is not the right time for this. Judging by the tone, His Majesty was indeed discouraged by Hestia's proposal, although the prince himself promised the former Duchy of Orcus to the Marquises, but the girl did not trust him. But most of all, the heroine was worried about how the emperor would react to her proposal. Then His Majesty noted how ideal the Marquis was in his wife. And then the emperor admitted that, in fact, after his last meeting with Caelus, he found out in detail about the Marquise from his son and his wife. His Majesty perfectly understood Hestia's thought and proposed to seriously discuss this idea with the crown prince. The emperor pronounced a verdict that everything would be 100 times better with Hestia as an assistant. The girl was jubilant, because Helios can now be secretly angry as much as he likes, because his father praises the Marquise and does not think to stop. After that, neither Helios nor Diana said anything more, and the Marquis and his wife talked a little more with the emperor. And while Hestia was going over the entire meeting with the emperor in her head, she didn't even notice that Kale had fallen asleep. The heroine thought it was so cute that she regretted that there were no smartphones in this world to take a photo of such a moment. After this, Hestia remembered how her lover nobly stood up for her before Helios. The emperor, meanwhile, was already in his bed, and his son was sitting next to him, looking after his father. Then His Majesty admitted to the Crown Prince that it was not easy for him to attend this meeting. The Emperor knows that Kale is very perceptive, so he understands that the Marquis only pretended not to notice anything. The prince told his father that Diana would soon come and heal him, but His Majesty asked his son to tell his wife not to twitch in the future. And then His Majesty added that he and his son needed to talk about Diana's strength because she treated her husband's father every day, and therefore the Emperor noticed changes in the heroine's gift. Then Helios went to his beloved, who said that she was already going to go treat the Emperor, and then asked how he was feeling. And then she started a dialogue about how she didn't expect the Marquise to raise the topic of the dukedom. And while Her Majesty spoke, her husband simply remained silent, as if gathering his thoughts to say something important. Before coming to Diana, Helios talked about her with his father, who noticed that his son's wife had been looking very anxious lately. The Emperor also noticed that something was happening with the girl's holy power, so he advised his son to spend more time with his beloved. After talking with his father, Helios also became pale, so the saint asked if he too needed to be treated after his visit to the Emperor. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince was thinking that his wife could not even cure the Emperor, but offered to use her power on Helios. And while His Majesty was worried that his wife was hiding changes in her strength from him, the girl herself decided that he was simply worried about the Marquise, too. The Crown Prince understands that he is sick of this whole situation, because he and Diana just recently got married, and this should have been the best time of their lives. But instead, they do nothing but discuss problems. Therefore, Helios could not stand it, grabbed his wife, and shouted for her to stop. But the girl did not understand at all what he was talking about. And then His Majesty said that he already knew everything, which greatly frightened his beloved. After this, the Crown Prince began to insist that Diana stop hiding her secret from him and tell him everything honestly. Hestia and her lover, meanwhile, had already arrived home, and, leaving the carriage, the Marquis admitted that he was not sure whether it was worth going so far to demand the dukedom. Then the girl asked Kale if he still didn't believe her, since he doubted her proposal. But the reason turned out to be not in trust, but in the fact that even the Emperor cannot give up such a high position without any reason. The butler had already invited the couple to eat. However, the Marquise asked her beloved to take a walk with her. This walk alone is necessary so that Hestia can communicate one of her important predictions to the Marquis. The main character couple, meanwhile, continued to argue because Diana claimed that she did not understand what her husband was trying to tell her. Helios understands that his father is right, that even if Diana turns the whole world against herself, her husband should be on the side of the heroine. And so the man asks his wife to be honest with him, directly asking her if her holy divine power has disappeared. The Crown Prince explained to the girl that his father already knew everything, because no matter how much Diana tried to help, no improvement was visible. So he guessed that the ability had disappeared. But Her Majesty decided that Helios simply trusted Hestia. It was thanks to the Marquise's prophecy that the man first heard about the loss of power. And here, Diana was right. And having learned this, the saint began to tell her lover that it was all a trap, because Hestia promised to keep this secret a secret. According to Her Majesty, it was the Marchioness who advised the heroine to hide this secret from the Crown Prince as long as possible, and Diana simply followed her advice. Helios was surprised by the fact that Hestia forced his wife to hide the prophecy from everyone. But the Marchioness told the Crown Prince that Diana ordered her to remain silent, keeping this information secret, with which Her Majesty did not agree. The words of the two girls differ from each other, which means that one of them is lying. All that remains is to choose who to trust in this situation. Diana, meanwhile, continued to claim that it was the Marquise who was to blame for all this. But the Crown Prince still did not understand why his beloved followed the advice of the woman she hated so much. And then the princess replied that she simply didn't know, and then added that her divine power had not disappeared, but had simply weakened for a while, and then would return. It turned out that Diana is not going to believe the prophecy because she thinks that her abilities have not disappeared. Helios said nothing, thinking everything over, and then Her Majesty began to ask him that he really believed not his wife, but the Marquise. The saint's words were illogical because at first she said that she did not believe Hestia's words, and then she did what the Marquise ordered while hiding the whole truth from His Majesty. There was too much evidence that the girl's prophecy was not lying. Helios told his wife about this. But even so, the crown prince still remains on the side of his beloved. He still wants to protect her to the very end because he loves her. Therefore, from now on, the main character must believe her husband and not hide anything from him because he will always be on her side. Diana, meanwhile, was thinking that even though the prince speaks such sweet speeches, since he loves her, he must completely believe her. Returning home, Hestia realized how tired she was, so she began to remember what she had been doing all day. So the Marquise remembered a walk with her beloved, during which she told him a prediction that a second provocation from another state was coming. And although the war on the border had already been stopped, the second provocation would be much more serious. So Kale asked if the girl had reported this information to the crown prince. Then the heroine reminded her husband about the first attack, which was prevented thanks to Hestia, after which she was able to gain the trust of Helios. When an armed conflict broke out with a neighboring country before the resurrection, the entire empire regretted the untimely departure of Caelus, who was soon able to return and stop the war. This means that if Kale resorts to diplomacy now, the enemy will demand the right to freely conduct business for his merchants in exchange for abandoning the war, as was the case last time. Before Hestia's rebirth, negotiations to end the war were on the verge of humiliation. So if Kale could resolve everything through diplomacy this time, then there would be a reason to give him the ducal title. And then the Marquis asked what would happen if he failed in diplomacy. But Hestia didn't even think about it, because she was confident in her beloved. Then the girl said that if Kale does not want to participate in all this, then she is ready to do everything for him. The heroine was so determined that she did not allow her husband to say a word, so he tried to calm her down by covering her mouth with his hand. As a result, due to the high level of embarrassment, the Marquis hastened to leave with the words that Uros was waiting for him, leaving Hestia alone. After that, the Marquise thought about how happy she was, and then the thought came to her about how Diana and Helios were doing. Meanwhile, Her Majesty was crying because her husband no longer believed her, although he promised that he would always be on her side. Diana is very worried about this, because the only person the girl can rely on did this to her, and the heroine has already begun to think that Helios has practically abandoned her. And then Her Majesty came to the idea that she had to choose Kale, because with Helios, everything would end very quickly. Diana remembered how tenderly and reverently the Marquis treated her, who always believed in the main character. Therefore, Her Majesty decided that she needed to take Caelus from Hestia in order to make him hers. And while Hestia mocked Diana's blind faith, the saint herself was confident that she would be able to return Kale, for God would take care of everything. In the original novel, the main characters had a real strong love, which the Marquise remembered while she was in the library of the Imperial Palace, where all the books of the Empire are collected. And the girl ended up there because her beloved wanted to go there before he returned to government duties, but he went not just to the library, but to the secret archive inside it, where confidential information is stored. The Marquise was not approved for permission to enter the vault, so she waited alone for her husband in the common library. The girl did not expect that she would be able to find in the library a book that the main character read in the original, so Hestia took this novel in her hands to study it in more detail. Helios constantly teased Diana, because among the large number of books, the heroine chose only love heroes. And while she was thinking about this, the prince approached her and asked if this was the only book that interested the Marquise. The girl did not understand why His Majesty came to this place because he had to work at this moment. Then the crown prince explained that he came to the library to look for some information, but it just so happened that he ran into the Marchioness because he wanted to talk to her. Hestia decided that this was all because of her request to receive the title of Duke, so she began to apologize to His Majesty if he was suddenly offended by her desire. But the crown prince explained that he had already forgotten about it. But since the girl wanted to discuss it, he began to change the topic to the dukedom, although initially he wanted to talk about something else. It turned out that the prince wanted to see the Marchioness in order to advise her to hide her predictions from Diana, which puzzled Hestia. It was clear how awkward the relationship between the crown prince and his wife was now. But the Marchioness pretended that she did not understand what His Majesty was talking about, clarifying what was wrong with her predictions. Then the crown prince explained everything by saying that his beloved simply did not believe the girl's predictions, and she, in turn, asked why Her Majesty listened to the Marquise's advice. Why is this stupid conversation necessary if His Majesty has already understood which of the two girls is lying, so he will not hear anything new from Hestia? Helios responded to the girl that she was saying everything correctly, and therefore infuriates her even more than usual. While the heroine was thinking about what was happening to His Majesty today, he asked her if there were any following predictions. But the heroine decided for now to remain silent about the threat of war, which she told Kale about, because if the Marquise makes a mistake, then her husband's merit may be reduced. Therefore, the girl told the prince that the only thing she could talk about at the moment was changing fashion trends in clothing. Helios seemed so impatient that the heroine began to reassure him that the predictions were just her vision of the situation. So if the crown prince relied only on them, he might miss something important. After that, silence arose between the heroes, and Hestia interrupted her with a request to leave first to go to her beloved. And as soon as the crown prince found out that Kale was also in the library, he hurried to find him. However, His Majesty could not go far because the Marquise tried to stop him by grabbing his arm. And due to the fact that all this happened very quickly, Hestia collided with Helios, who turned sharply. By chance, it was at that moment that Kale returned from the secret archive, finding his wife practically in the arms of the crown prince. The heroine was immediately afraid that her lover might misunderstand what he saw, so she immediately began to make excuses. After listening to all the explanations and justifications of his wife, the Marquis calmly replied that he understood everything. And then he just as dryly told Hestia that they should go home for now, as if nothing had happened. And since Kale understood everything correctly, and the heroine does not need to worry about this, then she can calmly go about her business. At the moment, all the girls' thoughts were occupied with speculation about what was happening between Helios and Diana. As a result, the heroine came to the conclusion that His Majesty no longer trusted his wife, since he decided to find out information from the Marquise. Hestia hoped that the love of the main characters was completely destroyed, but so far, this is not the case, because only trust has been lost in their relationship. And although Helios continues to love his wife, he can no longer trust her, which has already become a success for Hestia's plan. The Marquise was glad that Kale had not misunderstood her earlier in the day, but some part of the girl still feels sad, because this means that she does not evoke any feelings in her lover. But Hestia understands that she and Marquis are just contract spouses, so you shouldn't expect any feelings from the man. Kale himself, meanwhile, was thinking that when he saw his wife with the prince in the library, he remembered one moment from the past. For a couple of seconds, the Marquis almost thought that what happened with Diana was being repeated with Hestia. But then the man saw the expression of disgust on his wife's face and realized that he had simply almost misunderstood everything. Hestia didn't even have to make excuses at that moment, because all the girl's feelings were visible just from one look at her lover. Both the Marchioness and her beloved that evening were thinking about whether they were still just contract spouses for each other, or whether this was turning into something more. And the next day, Hestia learned news that shocked her so much that she even dropped her cup, because it turned out that the crown prince and his majesty had invited the girl to a tea party.